Seems very approachable for a star.
Yeah, no, he's a teddy bear.
Hi.
Hey, Marceline.
Hey, how is everyone?
All good. So I'm trying to see who else is there. There is Fabian. There is Christy. Oh, hey, Fabian. Fabian, for you that speak English. There is Florencia.
Hi.
Hola.
We are waiting for Peter Cook, which I think is the last one that we will start at 2. I think Brett and John will join us in a little bit later. I don't see Peter Cook yet.
Hola, Fabián.
Hola, Linda. Qué
Hola,
bueno
Hernán.
verte, Linda
Hi,
and healthy.
Do you see Peter Cook? Rachel, no?
Yeah.
Not yet. Okay. I don't know. Oh, hold on. Let me check. Peter Frankfurt. That's the one I was missing too. Peter Frankfurt is coming. So we have people from LA, London, New York, and Beavertown or Portland, I don't know. Okay.
I've never seen a moving background before, Kumaran. Nice.
Thank you. We're all supposed to do it in our studio. I don't know why my friends are not doing it.
Let me see. One of the Peters is having an issue, so I'm gonna send it now.
Joy is in her project, no? Joy, are you in your project?
Yeah. The sky is moving very slowly.
Is it moving? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's real nature. And we know that Cameron is in LA. And that's your project also, no? Oh, no.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that in LA.
I think, Florencia, you and I are the only ones that are like cameras don't allow us to use fun backgrounds. I don't know why.
No way. I cannot use it. I become the background.
Same. Something's up with my camera.
Hey, Hernan.
Hey, you got it?
Yeah, I found it.
Good. So we have one of the Peters. Peter Cook is joining us right now.
Hi, Peter. Nice to see you.
Hi, Florencia. You all right? Everybody good?
We are, yes.
Good.
Hi, Graham. I see you.
How are you?
I just want to give
And Marceline, yeah.
So while we're waiting, let me show you how gorgeous you all look in the green.
Wow.
That's exciting. You're ready for final season.
No.
I'm indulging myself.
Yeah.
I come back. I'm in my other office, not my SCI-Arc office,
Yeah.
by myself with the biggest screen. So it's quasi pornographic.
Yeah.
It's
That's
pretty
what we
cool.
like to hear.
Oh, I see Peter Cook.
Peter is here. Hey.
Hi.
Okay, so I think we have everybody was supposed to be here at 2 o'clock. So I'll introduce the jury first. The whole process of Zoom, it makes all the introduction more expedite. These are all distinguished people. So I'm gonna run through all the names, and then I'll do a very brief introduction of the studio. We have a couple of, we have actually, I think the only returning hero from Midtown is Christy, which was officially the last in-person review in SCI-Arc. So who knew?
It's true, and we were in a very small room.
In a small room, and none of us got COVID-19.
Yep, we were great.
We were great.
Yeah.
So Christy is a faculty at SCI-Arc, architect based in LA. Leah is her firm, and she's been in reviews from decades now. I mean,
Yes.
it has been a long time. So she's an expert in all things, these kind of studios. Well, I'm going by what I have in my windows. Next to her is Fabián Marcacho, painter extraordinaire, originally from Argentina, but based in New York right now. All of you are very aware of his work because we have a wonderful show that he did recently in SCI-Arc. Above of him is Grant Harman, philosopher and the head of our liberal arts program, and one of the most quoted and misquoted philosophers in recent times in architecture. So it's a pleasure to have Graham here. Next to Fabian is Sir Peter Cook, because of course you always have to have some royalty in a review. And Sir Peter Cook is our royalty designated on a regular basis. Peter and I, we know each other for a long time, and we have been sharing many of these reviews. And he's in the wonderful room that used to be his son. If you look carefully, there's a lot of stuffed animals in his back, which seems like a really good background for the studio that we're about to discuss.
Love it.
Next to Sir Peter is Marcelin Gau, the coordinator of design theory and pedagogy, faculty and producer and creative force behind the SCI-Arc channel and many other endeavors. Florencia Pita, coordinator of grad thesis at SCI-Arc, architect also based in Los Angeles. We're going to be joining Peter Frankfurt, which is next to Florencia, which is the founder and creative director and mastermind of Imaginary Forces, an agency which is practically impossible to define what they do. I don't even think he knows what they do.
No.
That's how they manage to charge people for it. So Peter is also a longtime friend, and we've been in many of these rodeos together. Later, we will have John Hawk, chief executive designer of Nike and VP of Nike, who was also in a review with you guys in February, so he's aware of that. And a little bit later, Brett Steele, the dean of UCLA, who also. So I think we have a couple of newcomers. We have a lot of people, but these are people that in different stages of teaching, they're being part of this conversation. So I think there is a lot of common grounds that you will see and it's familiar. But what Rachel McCall, who co-teaches the studio with me, we approach differently this semester. I was on sabbatical last semester for the first time in 20 years of teaching. So when I came back to teach, I honestly didn't know what to do. So we decided to go with that, and we called the studio Not Making Architecture. So it was in a way as much as a ground zero that we can do. So we try to liberate the students from any kind of frame of precedents, disciplinary arguments, historical arguments, or anything like that. So they have a huge amount. There was a lot of techniques and techniques and cinematic and image and all the things that we've been working for years. But the difference was there was no attempt whatsoever to justify whatever they were doing to try to anchor it in terms of architecture as we know it. It was about to try to define an aesthetic and a sense of uselessness in a positive way. And through the evolution of that, they developed what we call some kind of a genre or new species of infrastructure fake natures. And we give them a lot of latitude to place it in different parts. There was an intention when we started the studio, and I have to say that there was originally to try to become a kind of a green infrastructure in an Asian city. But after the COVID-19, it thought it was much more interesting for us to explore the possibilities of new territories for conquer as we move forward in architecture. So we embrace it that whatever we will do, it will be tainted with the glasses of the crisis, and we are. In a way, none of these projects trying to be responsible for any kind of a solution, but the idea was to understand that we are in very unusual times, and the way the screen and the way they operate, it will be like any other territory in which architecture operates. So what it started with a fairly free, nonsensical approach, ending becoming a completely different social political complexity. So again, none of the students are required to talk in those terms and so on, but we thought along the way that we, in a world that is upside down, to think and to liberate the possibility, absurdity, and to liberate the possibility of other elements that come to play in what we will consider the lexicon of architecture was a way for them to understand that there was a possibility of new grammars or new species of architecture. So in many ways, the studio, and for you guys, there is a lot of a kind of a group therapy kind of thing, because you can feel free to react as you see fit. There is no obligation whatsoever to try to anchor to any kind of disciplinary discourse. It's much more about to re-understand what does it mean in terms of medium aesthetics and so, some other element. That's why also I think the jury that we invited is a jury that came from very different fields with different approaches and different sensibilities, but all of them are interested in change, not to think outside the box, to ignore the box altogether. So I'm looking forward for that. Many of you who have been in our reviews, you know that we tend to do 2 or 3 projects at a time to engage in different kind of conversation, because the medium that we are in Zoom, we're not gonna do that today. We're gonna see 1 project at a time, which would limit a little bit the conversation of each project, but you will find that there is a lot of familiarities between the projects. So I think in a way the conversation can move back and forth, and I think we should use intimacy that Zoom is creating for us to really start to think almost as a salon conversation, almost as a dinner conversation in which everybody gets to show something, and then we can keep talking. So I think it's okay, we're going back and forth in a fluid way, and we'll do the best that we can, and I'll do my best to help and direct the traffic. So if you see me looking, it's because everybody see, I'm watching this in the big screen. So if you see looking my eyes up, down, it's not, I'm not paying attention to you, it's just I just to so big, and let me take a picture of this because it's pretty cool. So without further ado, Rachel, you take control.
Corey's going first. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm Corey, for everyone who doesn't know, and I'm just gonna play my video. Okay. Hi guys, before we get started, I just wanted to say that I hope everyone is staying safe and staying healthy during these weird times. It's kind of a strange moment to put out a video like this. Hopefully, if anything, it can serve as a reminder that there is still a lot of good things in the world and still a lot of positive stuff to look forward to. And so with that, let's get started. A couple of months ago, I went around Los Angeles and took these shots of these new parks and recreational areas that have been popping up all over the place. There were some at the beach, there were some in Griffith Park, in downtown, and even some around the Walt Disney Concert Hall. They started with these fake food items that seem to be melted onto one another to create these new forms. There are these really big and blobby melted moments, but there are also a lot of cute sprinkles and other details that seem to be very carefully placed. Parts of these installations seem to also have this like plant-like form growing on it. It almost looked like lichen or something. Anyways, all of it was made out of this inflatable, bouncy plastic material that was really playful and inviting. A lot of people were around taking pictures, playing on them, or just hanging out, and it was really cool to see. It's kind of ironic that these just started appearing recently given the current situation, but I think that once all of this passes, these installations and parks serve as a really good reminder that our public spaces are special and something that should be celebrated. And I think that it's also a nice reminder that we can design places that are purely for leisure or recreation, or even just for taking selfies. You guys enjoyed this video and that it gave you a nice little distraction from everything that's going on right now. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.
I think, Corey, if you want, you can play it again without sound and we can have it as a background.
Sorry, you guys have to watch my face for a little while.
I think it's okay to play again, and then if you want, you can go to the grid so you can see people, but I think it's good to play once.
Okay.
To encourage our distinguished panel critics, everything goes. You really don't need to think until you have something incredibly spectacular to say.
I immediately made me think about the artist Linda Benglis.
Sorry, I can't.
Why, Fabian?
Okay, good, you hear me. There was this type of pieces that, you know, she made during the 70s that they were like spills of material in gallery floors, and then they crawl into the walls, and she would use actually foamy, like synthetic materials.
There's actually a great piece on her work in SCI-Arc channel that KV Moon did. You should check it out.
Oh, cool.
So, Corey, I just, you know, the benefit of being home is that I have stuff, and I found this.
Oh my God.
So this is from my daughters, and I mean, it's not Jello. I mean, I'm sure you've seen them. So, you know, the reality of your project is quite tangible. I don't know. I have one mini version of your model here.
Yeah.
Have you seen these toys? They are like, so, you know, and this is translucent one, but there's some that are solid. I think that, I mean, I know that, you know, we can Google them, but I wish the render had a bit more. I don't have the solid ones, you know, but the solid ones, they're not as matte as you have them, you know, in terms of render finish. I like the way that you have the translucent one because it reminds me, but look how it shines, you know, within this light. So I think I love the project, of course. I think it's beautiful, and the setting also, but I think that I would have liked that you had a bit more of my material diversity in terms of how this, I don't know what they're called, squishies. I don't know. This is a rabbit, by the way. This is like a bunny, like a small bunny. So I'm sure this comes from medical research. I mean, everything that we have, it comes probably from some other source, and it comes from maybe, other technologies that were used and then they're reapplied to the toy industry. But I think that I think that the finish of your render, they seem quite self-similar. When you change to each fruit, I love the apple, and that I think if that had like more of a caramel apple, and then the translucent ones, and almost as if you could like take different examples, even these ones. I think that all of them seem like balloons that we know, but these guys, they now they get sticky, but they also, another thing that they do, I just washed it before I showed it, because it's not, it gets all of this. Okay, I'm letting it go, but it gets like it would have sand on them. You know what I mean? It would start to get, it would have like leaves. It would have some trash. So I think that, which this had, 5 seconds ago. So I think that it would have been nice that you mix this guy up. It's in the sun, and then it gets in the, and then it will get some birds, something. I think so. The material becomes a bit more real and less render.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I love the scenes where you're like right here, where we don't really see the extents of the park. And then we get these little glimpses of grass, or that final scene where you're looking at the sky and there's grass growing through the thing, I think are really powerful, because it's it's less of an object, and it becomes more of an environment. You just have no idea how extensive this thing is. And I love the way that sometimes the light, the reflectivity starts to play off the context. Like in that one scene at Disney, where not with the sparkles, or what do you call those? The
sprinkles.
But the other scene where you're seeing kind of more of the donut and cupcake and apple stuff, and then the light from Disney starts to match almost this kind of iridescence of your form. I think it's the next scene, maybe. I think those
I can find it.
Those moments.
Oh, here, this one.
That one, yeah, wait, right there. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
The iridescence of your form and the building start to, and then you start to ask, like, which came first? Is it the building? Really beautiful.
Thank you.
I think it's forbidden fruit. Can you hear me? We're living in a weird world where most of the world is forbidden, temporarily. But this fruit is forbidden too, because it's all, even if it were the fruit chosen, is almost the stuff that we're not, certainly people like me are not meant to eat. We're all on diet. And, in California, everything's sort of, juice and healthy and salad, and you have this kind of yucky stuff that's sort of, not only is the aesthetic a bit, for me, in memory of sort of certain pop art of let's say the 70s, but the chosen food is of that period when one was, one just indulged, one didn't care. And yet it has the other thing that's intriguing, just since most people have been talking about the materiality of it, is the sort of slightly gray hue, as if it's got it's not full-on color of the fruit. It's got a gray dust over it, which I find intriguing. Whether that was intentional and what that means. And then the balls, I don't get. The balls come to me from somewhere else, something else.
Easter.
Well, they're not the right shape.
I wish, Corey, that you had broken the law and gone out and shot all of your back plates after the lockdown, so that they were all empty. And because what I think what so many of us are experiencing is this kind of weird emergence of things that we hadn't either noticed because of all the noise, or things actually becoming more present, sort of peeking out because they have a chance to. And this is just sort of a fun riff on what's growing, what's happening, what happens when there's space, and it's the absence of people that makes it possible, because it doesn't seem to invite interaction with people, right? And obviously in your render you couldn't do that, but it's interesting.
Thank you.
Corey, I want to ask about the relation of this to the course theme, not architecture. Is that exactly what it was, Hernan? Not architecture or not doing architecture?
No, architecture as a departure point, understanding we are in School of Architecture, somehow we will never do that. So it's aspirational, but knowing that we're going to fail in the achievement, but the idea was to delay as much as we can.
All right. Well, the easy way to say this is not architecture is that it's fake, right? It's superimposed on video footage.
Right.
But beyond that, I want to zero in on what is it about the images that makes them not architecture. And here's the analogy I'm thinking of. Michael Fried, the art historian, wrote a really nice article about the sculptor Anthony Caro, about how Caro was trying to do tabletop sculptures. And he thought about this problem for a while. And the first thought he had was just make really small sculptures. But then he realized that's the easy way to do it, because the small sculptures could be blown up to large size and not be tabletop anymore. So the solution Caro came up with is that the tabletop sculptures had to have some part of them hanging below table level so that they couldn't possibly be flat on any floor. And so somehow there was something in the form of the sculptures themselves that made them tabletop. And I wonder, in the case of these images, is there something in them themselves that makes them not architecture? Is it the fact that they're food, or?
I guess what we did was we kind of we started with an idea that was maybe not architectural. So when talking to Hernan, I started with this idea of fake food because it was really weird to me because it was like created like purely for aesthetic reasons and it could not serve the function that food is meant to serve. And I thought that maybe like if you literally translated that into like a design, that it might produce some interesting results.
Food, and you also didn't just choose food, you chose sweets. Was there a specific reason for that?
Yeah, because I wanted it to be something that was like extremely desirable. And I feel like, you know, if I put Brussels sprouts out there, maybe it wouldn't be as enjoyable to look at.
Okay. I love the idea of squishy. And the specific colors. Oh, somebody said something. I'm sorry.
Nick, go ahead, Graham.
I was just going to ask, and then how did you choose the color palette? Because they're not all realistic, sweet colors, obviously.
Yeah, so I mean, so the colors on the like food that are like kind of colored to what they should be, I tried to make them like not too overwhelming, but also not too underwhelming. So like if maybe like if the berries were like their true like saturated colors, like a little bit too strong. So I just was trying to kind of play like in some middle area. And then the greenish ones are actually like, because we were also exploring ideas about plants and things. And so that was kind of a play on like some kind of lichen moss form. And that added like an additional layer of color that I thought brought it into a realm that maybe you would look at it a little longer and be like, that donut is green and yellow. That doesn't make any sense.
Okay, one last question and then I'll drop out here. Was there anything, what didn't work? What did you think was going to work that didn't work, and why?
So like in the original designs, I guess I was playing with also like some kind of like sauce material that was getting draped on everything, but that kind of just like masked everything and made it look like it was like put in a trash bag or something. So that to me like was something that I was exploring at the beginning that I kind of threw away towards the middle of the semester.
I was just thinking that vomit would be the danger limits of a project like that, right? With these colors.
Yeah.
Corey, I think my headphones were not working a minute ago, but I really love the way you presented like the format, because it made me think a lot of kind of unboxing or unwrapping videos that often target kind of, you know, like young-ish children. I'm particularly thinking of my friend's 7-year-old who's obsessed with watching Squishy, like the kind of unboxing videos of those squishies. Exactly. And it has this like wonderful, it's like it's so seductive how much that unboxing has a quality of discovery. And I think that you kind of walked the line in how you presented this too, which is kind of like Peter was saying, that you could imagine that people would just like discover these in the city at the moment. I also think there's something kind of perverse about the idea of like squishies, which are so obsessively about like touching and squishing at a moment when I think that's exactly the thing that none of us can do, right?
Yeah.
So it would be this desire. You could imagine things open up in a few weeks or months, and this desire to want to touch and feel that squish, but probably only be able to kind of take it in visually. It seems pretty perverse and wonderful.
Thank you.
I think my only other maybe comment or critique would be that, maybe this is similar to Florencia with the sand on it or something, but those squishies, you could imagine that it would start to blister sometimes from the heat, and there, around the edges, it would kind of crack like the way an old leather car seat cracks, or something like that. And I think that could be a way for you also to kind of play that game between like fun and fruity and playful, and also this kind of maybe underside.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Cory. Fantastic project. We're gonna move on.
Thank you. Thank you.
Then Justine, you're next, right?
Yeah. Hi. So hi everyone. I'm Justine. I'm just gonna play my video as well. Let me know if something goes wrong.
California is now under a statewide stay-at-home order. The first state to take that step.
We need to bend the curve in the state of California. We go to California now, the nation's most populous state and the world's 5th largest economy. It is a strange Saturday indeed, as Daniel Backus reports for us tonight with nothing to do and nowhere to go. The Golden State is in shutdown mode.
Normally bustling retail areas look like ghost towns. Congested freeways are clear and beaches are empty as Californians spend their first weekend on social distancing lockdown. In March 19, Los Angeles County issued a stay-at-home order to help curb the coronavirus spread. In addition to these measures, Governor Gavin Newsom announced yesterday that additional security devices will be installed around the city of Los Angeles to ensure safety and prevent the spreading of the virus.
We need to go beyond the measures adopted by other countries. We believe that acting now is necessary to patrol and prevent the spreading of the virus. In the upcoming weeks, we'll be installing synthetic trees around California to regulate the spreading of the virus. These synthetic trees were initially designed to replace the Los Angeles iconic palm trees that are presently dying. The upcoming pandemic has forced the city to accelerate the development of these devices and adapt them to the current situation.
This is truly a leap of faith for the state of California. The synthetic trees are devices that create an ecosystem for genetically transformed rambutan fruits to grow and operate. The fruits are designed to assist in the surveillance of the city and locate potential threats. Its patent biological sensors allow them to identify with certainty any carrier of the virus. They have shown to be excellent companions for humans and can even act as moral support in these difficult times.
That was Justine Poulin, one of the women who worked on the prototyping of the synthetic rambutan trees. If identified as a carrier by the rambutans, the state of California highly advises to isolate yourself immediately in one of the pods hanging to the synthetic tree. The pods are easily accessible and provide the ideal environment to help reduce the symptoms of the virus. If targeted by the rambutan, the pod's door will automatically open to let you in. The pods are equipped with all the necessary supplies to stay in them up to a day or until a health agent comes for additional support. In this unprecedented situation, Governor Gavin Newsom asks for everyone's collaboration and understanding. For the time being, all of our interviews will be conducted remotely and keeping the social distancing guideline. Dania Backus, CBS News, March 19, 2020.
California is now under a...
Okay, so maybe just to comment a little bit before letting you talk about it. So I started the semester looking at the process of acupuncture and how acupuncture could be applied to human organs, but also to fruits. So that's where I started. And I think there was like, with everything that was happening, there was an interesting link to make between this idea of like acupuncture, health, but also surveillance and eyes. So that's where I started. And I think it's been an interesting journey to like start with something that was like completely remote from architecture and then put it back into a context that we know of.
Well, I love your storytelling, Justine. It made me smile and laugh, and also it was kind of weirdly spot on. Like, as madcap as it is, it's also vaguely credible. So hats off on that.
Yeah, I would follow up on that by saying I really appreciate the sort of multidimensional quality to this, where it is both, there's something really kind of compelling, and there are moments where it's cute, and then there are moments where it's sort of horrifying, and then it's disturbing. And so there's like a mixture, multiple registers that you're kind of working on with us as an audience. And then, you know, I like the trope of the news report and having you as the author, as somebody who has worked on these things, and just aesthetically using the virus itself, like the image of the virus as this vegetation that almost looks like a lychee. So there's, you know, it has multiple readings and they kind of go in different directions. And I really appreciate that sort of tension that you're producing in the work. It's really, you know, so I think it's a pretty profound level that you're working on in terms of the storytelling and the imaging of this and the aesthetic.
Justine, great imagination. I can't wait to see the movie. Did you prepare yourself for what will be the inevitable political critiques of this in a time when we're worried about the surveillance state? You're presenting the surveillance state as a kind of guardian angel that's going to isolate virus patients and put them in a nurturing cocoon until the health department comes and takes care of them. What about that aspect of the project?
Well, I think, yeah, well, I think it was really, I think I started to have this idea when I've heard a little bit about like what China was doing, where like they would like, you know, like try to get as much information as it could from like people and try to really surveil everything to make sure that yeah, human health would be protected. And then I kind of wanted to play with this tension between this idea of privacy, but also to health. So like questioning how much should a government go to like protect like the whole health of a population, like in terms of like how much should they like go beyond the privacy of people to protect the rest of the population. So it was something that I wanted to play with in the video.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the sinister aspect of this is exactly right on because here in this country, there's a lot of discussion already about even the primitive devices that might be come up with that people's privacy will be invaded. What you do there is you give it form. And I think what people are mostly worried about is the sort of sinister aspect that the invasive things will be software. You know, you don't know the degree, and you can't touch the virus unless it touches you. You can't touch the chain of information. You give it form, and that makes it, I think it's a brilliant piece of movie, by the way. I think it's kind of deadpan narration is very important, you know, in the same way that we're getting in the news a lot of deadpan in order to sort of, you almost feel not to give you real information. And so you immediately, one's antennae of suspicion are much, much heightened compared with normal. But you give this form, and then you have this so that the invasive eye, I mean, I think the eye is the most, you know, it's a very easy known symbol, but it's a very invasive symbol. And you're being physically watched, and then you're trapped. And that you take the aesthetic, as somebody already mentioned, you take the aesthetic from what apparently is the shape of the virus. You make it pretty by making it like a berry there. I'm fascinated by that it has a coloration, because, you know, the palm trees are sort of fairly deadpan green, but this is something that you would, I mean, if it was in our garden, you'd notice it immediately. It's sort of come out into bloom. But maybe you could say that's symbolic as well, that this condition has suddenly bloomed overnight, so to speak. So it's a very, very clever piece of work.
When Peter talks about the symbolic side of it, I immediately start thinking about Olidon Redon, depictions of eyes as a sort of pre-surrealist painter. And I actually associated with this project, actually. Now, the interesting thing is that there is something actually frustrating about viruses because you cannot really see them. So I see the eyes almost as a sort of like desire to see, because the type of surveillance that we will need in these situations of pandemic are not really about the scene, but it's about the, you know, the micro scene. So I like the type of surrealist connotations, but I don't know, there is something that I think it feels like introduction to a movie. And I really like the fact of all the news and all the fictional things. And I know that this is not supposed to be architecture, but I don't know how it will somehow direct to some kind of architecture.
Yeah. I feel like the architectural, I mean, not that it has to have a, you know, obviously we're not necessarily hunting for the architectural element, but I love the development that you have here, Justine, of also having the pods that people would like have to get in, right? There's something in like really kind of, yes, you'll be provided for that, like that feeling right now that everyone wants to get tested, you know, because you want to know, but then realizing that the flip side of that is that if you're discovered, you may kind of immediately have all of your rights sort of taken away and put in this pod. And so I think that part, like, I do think it feels like a trailer in a wonderful way, meaning I want to see the movie. And I really think that once these pods would be full of people, they would probably become another type of eye, right? If you're sitting in that thing for 20 hours, you're just going to be looking out at others that are also in the pods, right? And sort of having nothing but eye contact and not being able to have sort of the verbal or physical interaction. And I think that would be a whole nother level of the amount of eyes that over time would be within these trees.
I also love the opening shot where at first I didn't understand what was happening, where I thought they were like fingers. So that almost like the eyelashes of the pod opening, and then the implication is maybe that we're seeing the whole film through the eyeball, so that as we're seeing other eyeballs, it could be like I'm inside of the pod, it's the eyeball that's coming. I think that is implied and could even be heightened more, this sort of point of view, like whose eye are we following on this journey?
I think that Justine, I mean, it's fun how you weave reality through news, and then we, in a time when we don't trust the news, so I would say that's fiction. So the fiction of the news, because it's selective. I also saw that in your Photoshop you erased some cars because I think the streets are not empty.
Oh no, they
there's
were. I took footage of someone who actually walked around the city, or
and there was
skate
not
around
even
the
a
city.
single car.
No, it was completely. Yeah, I didn't modify the footage really. It was like
that's insane.
Yeah.
Look at that view. I mean, that's like, so anyway, because like actually there's some, maybe that's the day one, but but I think that that you're working through. I agree with Fabian's take on the eye as a symbol, that it relates to a meaning that you have there in regard to surveillance, in regards to vision and so on. But that actually right now you would have a different kind of vision. And if you look at the fake palm trees that are everywhere in the city, you know, and we have palm trees, but when you travel east, they are pine trees. So it's like, yes, of course, LA will have palm trees. So those are our media. They are for, you know, phone, you know, wireless phones, and, you know, so they're all like this kind of wireless world. So if you look at it, you know, you look through it with a special lens, you will see how it kind of interconnects. So I think that it would be interesting that you don't only find your palm tree. I like these later images where the palm tree disappears. There's these leaves that are out of scale, and it's only about these sensors, you know, more than the eye, the sensors, because I think that the acupuncture, it seems that it was at the beginning. It doesn't really come through at the end. You know, but I think that what is interesting is almost that the acupuncture poles are talking about, you know, I don't know, capturing a kind of an invisible network of information, and the tree disappears. And then they start to gather. There's so many infections that start to gather. Like, I think seeing like the news, creating true fake news, evolving. Now we're at this, you know, like, I don't know, like building up the narrative, almost as this is the beginning of the movie. And then you kind of building it up where palm trees are disappearing, the pots are exponential, and the sensors, now they're like pollen, they just match on buildings, you know, the green sticks are everywhere because you have to measure more and more. So I think that it's like, I would have like, you know, augment the narrative to a point where almost you know, the city is kind of covered with these guys.
Justine, it's great because everyone is filling in your story. Which is sort of the perfect trailer, right? You've created a fantastic narrative launch pad, and everybody's riffing on it. So that's exactly what you want. It's great. I think the eyes are hysterical. I mean, I've found myself laughing throughout the whole piece, and it's very sinister, but it's funny, and it's got just a wonderful sort of weirdly analog flavor to it, like the way that the eyes are just peering around and looking and blinking and disappearing. It's very clever. It's very charming.
We had to move on, but Justine, terrific work. The only thing I would like to add is I really think, I mean, the project is, as Peter Cook and Peter Frankfurt and Marcel and Chris, they all mention it. What I really applaud is it doesn't hide away from the polemic that Grant was mentioning. I think it's okay. I mean, I think it's good to take on it and to figure it out what does it mean. And I think that's part of what a designer should do, is to embrace those issues. So I really applaud that you didn't hide away from that, and it gave a different kind of edge to the project. So that's pretty ballsy. So
thank you.
Well done. So we're gonna move to the next one.
Okay, Rachel is going to help me play my video. My name is Joy, and I'll comment a little bit after it plays. Okay, so my project is a reimagination of a natural landscape on the edge of a city, populated with a dense collection of mechanical parts and pieces. I was interested in the notion of ludic and playfulness while experiencing this synthetic forest from various perspectives. Various elements are seemingly derivative of the natural world and take on the urban landscape as the scales shift. The result is bizarre but beautiful.
I think, Joy, this is really a wonderful development from, if I recall at midterm, we were talking a lot about like the foil, like the particular type of foil, like what's behind you right now in your picture, like that kind of version of it, something between like a tool and a foil. And I think what's really wonderful is as you move us through these landscapes, that those cycles of materials and thereby all the associations that come with those materials are kind of overlaid with every instance of those flowers that you're giving us. And so I think it's really beautiful in some ways, like the subtlety of keeping the form relatively the same, but being able to kind of, for me, have this narrative develop with all these overlays of association. So if the previous student sort of through kind of a movie trailer tactic had us kind of guessing and developing stories in our own imaginations, I think yours does it quite beautifully through kind of a sequence of materials. And I think that that's really wonderful.
I love the scene where, oh, sorry. Oh, I love the scene where you go from the glass flowers to, they start to almost become like this foil that's sort of burning or crumpling right after this. These are quite amazing too, really beautiful. And I start to realize after seeing the fire hydrant at the end, that I'm looking at these kind of pieces of urban infrastructure like fire hydrants, I guess, that are nested inside of the flower. And I wonder, it could be amazing if there were like different pieces of like the world as we knew it before we went into quarantine, things that we use on a daily basis, just as some of the comments before came up, that now when things have quieted down, we're hearing more birds and we're hearing, even if there aren't, maybe there are, we don't know. And so the way in which this might make us see the world very differently. I'm not sure about the ending. I almost wonder if that hydrant scene, these are amazing too. Some of these shots that made me think a little bit about, if you don't know the work of Pipolati Rist, you'd probably love it. Some of these where she's in fields of flowers. I think it's called Pour My Body Out. Or, I mean, there are many different pieces that she did. But again, I think that somehow the sequencing and the ending maybe could have been a little bit, a little more work done on that in terms of how you bring the story to closure. Because at first I was a little bit confused. When I saw it through the second or third time, I start to kind of make the connections. But the first time I saw the scene, I was sort of like, wait, what? And then you kind of want more to come and it ends. So. But
we bring ourselves with us. And I found the very beginning and the very end quite intriguing sideways, because at first it looked like trash. It looks as if it was trash being thrown into a plastic thing. And right now we're very, very conscious of plastic and trash, because when we get deliveries, we wash them and we leave them, and we've become hyper conscious of odd stuff that's wrapping. And then I think the soundtrack is absolutely critical to this project. This whole issue of the crinkle, the plasticity, the brittleness of the thing. So it's not a real flower. It is this kind of thing that comes from a very different territory. But at the end, the very last shot where we saw a piece of California coast, remembering when you might have been starting your project, it wasn't it at the end of the fires, I wonder if the original germ of this, of finding a new floreation, came from the devastated, before we got tied up with the coronavirus, was the devastated territory and what is going to grow. So that I think it has another, for me, another resonance. It's very pretty, and I think it's beautiful even, and therefore I think it gets a lot of strength from that. But I guess it's just the mood of the moment. One is looking for symbolism, even symbolism that you may or may not have thought of yourself. I think one can't help it right now.
I actually, this project triggers so many ideas, because first, I love the connection actually that Peter says into the other disaster before the virus, that was the fires in LA. And I was thinking immediately about the fire hydrant and this type of flowers as a sort of fire barrier in the hills of LA that will be this type of functional, actually, fire extinguisher that will stop the future fires. And this is actually interesting because it have a very surreal kind of feeling, but I identify with the type of synthetic, artificial nature, or artificial machine, beautiful but functional, creating a pragmatic situation in the landscape. I mean, there is a lot of interesting associations, and I would love to see these things growing in the hills of Los Angeles.
Funny that as I keep watching it, I like it better and better. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't work as a linear film, like that there isn't a particular story that I'm tracking. But there are beautiful, but it's pretty and it's disturbing, so that there's that nice tension. And as I watch it looping, it's almost as though the fire hydrant at the end could be the beginning of the story. But there's some very beautiful things in it. And the more you watch it, the more you see, which is always a good sign.
One thing is that since Marceline mentioned the pipilotic wrist, I got the book, so I can send it. So anyway, so this is a nice an exhibition that she did at the Wexner Center. What is interesting is that she did the famous one at the MoMA, but the one before at the Wexner Center. And what is interesting is that once you get close to these flowers, they don't look like what they look when you're far away. You know, so there's like, yeah, Marceline is posting. So, you know, it's like you have a view, in your case, you look at them from afar, like a flower bloom, and then you look at this from this close. And I think that in her work, my understanding is that when you that close, you see other things that are very different. And then you have the three narratives. The other narrative is like coming out of the hydrant, the hydrant, and being part of the infrastructure of the city, like being part of the water, you know, almost like what is more scary than having something in your water. So that the symbolism, I would guess, of the water network in LA. So I think, and the water, like, you know, so it seems that it has many symbolism. Also, you need water. Are they there because they need that to grow? So I think it would have been nice in the narrative, like you're playing in different stories. The one that you're here, this one, the flower blooms are amazing, but they're very artificial. They are synthetic, you know, they feel almost as if there's something that is toxic on them. And I think that in her case, Pipilotic wrist does the same. You're in nature, and yet this is not right. It's like more like a terror story than the views that you have from the landscape, more like the Sound of Music idea of like landscape and flowers. So I think that you taking on the different views, but I would just like really tune into what each view gives you in relationship to the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in Egypt, they had a tendency to disguise cell phone towers as palm trees, which on one level is clever, but on another level, it was kind of off-putting once you figured out what they were doing. You'd kind of flinch a bit every time you went past one of these fake palm trees that you knew was a cell tower. And I actually liked the flowers better when I thought they were just a spectacle for the city of LA. When I discovered that there was a fire hydrant inside of it to prevent wildfires, I mean, it's very practical, but then somehow the flower covering bothered me more at that point. And I can't quite put my finger on why that is. It's almost like the form doesn't have a life of its own at that point. It's there only to conceal something that's ugly. I'm not sure if I have a clear point from that. It's an uneasiness that I have.
I'm not sure, Joy, you would agree with that. I think some people are projecting of this of be fired. I don't know. I think there is it could go either way. I think it's an interesting point, Graham, but I'm not sure the project makes it a final decision on that. Okay. But we were flirting about this idea of artificial infrastructure, nature infrastructure, and so on. So I think everybody's trying to find an angle. But I think also that there is another element to consider, which is in the, I mean, we always forget that LA, whatever you see green in LA is fake. It was man-made. I mean, this is a desert. So in a way, I think there is a whole series of layers there. So it's interesting because I think you're right. I mean, with the cell phone towers and all that. But it's interesting because I would argue that every piece of nature you see in LA is not different than those cell phone towers in Egypt. So I think that there is a certain kind of a game playing into it that I think it is the ambiguity of it is interesting to me.
All right, point taken.
No, but I think it's an interesting take, the one that you're saying. I mean, how much the thing can be the thing by himself, or you need to justify the existence by adding a function. I think it's at the heart of the discussion. It's always going to be.
Right.
And I'm not sure which one is the right answer, honestly.
Yeah, you know, the thing, my previous place where I lived, Dubuque, Iowa, which is on the Mississippi River, one of the most amazing things I learned there is that the present day Mississippi River bears almost no resemblance to what it was like in nature. In nature, it was a series of long lakes separated by small waterfalls. And Mississippi River, which is this great, long, supposedly natural river, is the result of a lot of dredging that made it a long navigable waterway, which it wasn't before. And that got me thinking a lot about how many of the things we think of as nature are not really nature. There's a lot of artifice involved. And you make this point now about Los Angeles, and I see that.
It's an interesting conversation about it. What is real? Well, I mean,
what's natural?
Yeah, or in nature, as has been said many times, in nature is an object by itself. But anyway, I think the project raises those questions. So.
And Hernan, there is always this double utopia that we live in right now. There are the people who just say, give me a break, I want to go back to nature, that goes into so many of the, the past. And then people who want to just get integrated into the machine and forget about nature. And there are two types of different utopias. And we are sort of suspended in between them. And they're all these real places.
I think that's pretty cool. I think it's a good note. If nobody else has any other final comment on this, I think we should move to the next one. Thank you, Joy. Good job.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gregory. This project is called Victor. I suggest we watch it first and then we can discuss after.
just wanted to let you know, I'm scheduled to fly off in 2 days.
Oh, where to?
Victor.
Oh, so you're going after all?
Yeah, I think I need it.
Well, I mean, if that's what you want, how long are you staying for?
I mean, I'm not allowed to do more than 2 weeks.
Okay, it's a long flight up there. Be safe, yeah?
Today marks the 25th anniversary of Victor's opening to the public. After nearly 3 decades of construction, the synthetic park welcomed its first visitors in 1995, offering its recreation spaces to thousands more since. With a 250-mile radius and an overall surface of over 785,000 square miles, Planet Victor is roughly a quarter of the moon's size, making him the 8th largest satellite in our solar system and the only and largest artificial one to this day. Victor orbits around its barycenter and around the moon in prograde direction with the same frequency that the moon orbits Earth, one revolution relative to the stars in about 27 days. Victor's orbit has been the primary concern of the control center installed in the lunar surface. Most commercial space lines offer daily flights and reservations and are now open. Visits to Victor are allowed solely for recreational purposes and strictly in isolation. We'll be right back.
I never truly understood the notion of distance. We're brought into mankind with an innate will to fail and to explore. And yet we never truly manage to achieve fulfillment. Because there are still aspects of mankind that remain helplessly distant and inherently isolate. Let me just play it up for you. I'm happy to do a recap, but if you guys have any immediate comments or thoughts, I'll be glad to make this a little more conversational.
I like how you started as a domestic, a little bit of a domestic frisson, right? I mean, the girlfriend is she upset that you're going up to Victor again? Is that what's happening? But it's a good misdirect. I was like,
I mean, eventually, if it's presented in a more like cinematic way, it's a little up to the viewer to decide what's her vibe. Yeah, there's definitely like it's a big decision. So yeah, there's definitely some going with being upset on that.
Just let me welcome John Hogg. John, I introduced you earlier, so feel free to jump whenever you feel like.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you.
Hi, John.
Hello, John.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Sorry I'm late. Look forward to seeing the work. Hope you're well, healthy. Creativity will not be quarantined.
Yeah, let me just say then that Victor is a planet. It's a synthetic park. It's completely artificial. Construction took about 30 years. It has a 250-mile radius, and visitors from Earth are allowed to spend anything from 2 days up to 2 weeks while in isolation.
I think the mood
yeah.
is really like there's hazard. It's very much like right from the get-go. I realized that this character is going to be taking a kind of risk by going there. I mean, it really speaks to the current moment in terms of like this idea of uncertainty and this distant place. I think the setup, it makes me think of Tarkovsky's Solaris, the film, like really beautifully kind of narrated, disturbing. I mean, it does really move you. And the aesthetic, I think, is appropriate in terms of this, you know, looking back at the earth and then the gray kind of silvery entwined mass and the particulate matter. And again, referring back to that idea of this kind of viral sensibility. I don't know, it's definitely, you've really cultivated a very specific aesthetic of hazard in a way.
I think it's the most architectural of the projects we've seen so far. And there was even just a glimpse of a handrail I saw a moment ago. And I think that, yeah, I agree that the slight edge of the girl's voice makes this point about it being potentially dangerous. But what I kept looking at when I look at the visual is actually I sense in the author, whether he would admit it or not, that old sort of tectonic taste for placing certain objects in relation to other objects. It's not a single type of growth, but it's a series of different growths and organizations. And I can, apart from this flowered bit now coming, but I can read all sorts of sort of wishes to organize and arrange so that the whole plate of stuff is intriguing, has some of this, some of that, some links between things, some structure to some of the things, some sort of floppiness to other things. It is, to me, it's an architectural piece. None the worse for that, and I don't think it breaks the rules in any way. I'm not reading so much abstraction into this. I'm not reading seriously, just from my own view, I'm not reading as much vegetation into it. I'm seeing matter, and I'm seeing different types of matter, and I'm seeing them laid over each other and dangled over each other. And the intriguing ones, I think, are the sort of mists that are made up of particles. There's one mist that's large particles, there's another one of smaller particles. So I think it is a sort of portfolio of different conditions that probably appeal to the author. And yeah, why not dream your world and stick it in space and then make it dodgy, dangerous, whatever as well. And I think, therefore, I read this as not so particular to the present moment, but an architectural piece.
But I think that, Gregory, yes, to your point of, I mean, I really like the film, and my favorite moment, if we're going to go through that, is the last image. There's something, I think, to Peter Cook's point on there's how it can relate to the moment, and I think that there's a moment that you say in the conversation that you're going to be alone, you know, so like a world for one. Which is a little bit the world that we have now, you know, world for one or for two or for three, you know, like almost each home is a small world for a few individuals or for a single person and their pet. So I think that in a way that converted into this world that you created. I'm not very keen, I think, on these images. I agree with Peter. These are amazing. These moments that don't exist. I mean, why would you do that? Why would you go to this world for one near the moon? It's because it's something that this world doesn't have, or the moon would not have. And I think that floating in the darkness, I think is more interesting as a kind of a new type of nature that you invented, which is in between this kind of petal world, which is the proliferation of petals that you have, and the kind of the gases that created the Big Bang. I mean, I think there's a mixture that you have between a hardcore, like the Earth or the Moon with like a center core and, you know, kind of certain solidity, and this thing that is just pure, you know, pure matter. With moments, I think the interior shots where you have stairs and then you have these very close flowers, I think that is just a little bit too reminiscent of a scientific study. But those dark views where the light is completely different and you have that is an image that I think that is always stays when you look at you know, expeditions, moon expeditions and so on. And the fact that color, there's no color in the moon. So I really like, I mean, when you look at the flowers, the pink, and then there's some purple and blue, but that last one is this kind of black and white world that I found that it was that final view was quite interesting.
To me, it's actually one of the, I really like the project. I think it's actually like this sort of, I don't know, imaginary architecture. But to me, the things that are interesting is actually all these particles, for instance, that are around this sort of artificial asteroid or structure feels like that is already space trash. So there is this sort of beautiful thing, and at the same time, this sort of trash. And there is this other type of sort of poetic trash, that is the why all this archaeology of the moon landing and all these things, that they seem very nostalgic, since right now we have another peaking of enthusiasm on the space adventure, let's say, with Elon Musk and, you know, SpaceX. And the whole idea of the kid crying, and it reminds me actually, I grew up actually, I am 55, I grew up with this utopia of the space. And when I talk with my kid, he says, I don't know why you're interested in space. Space is awful. There is nothing to do in space. We cannot go anywhere. And to me, these projects actually combine this sort of black side or dark side of space and the alienation kind of situation into a chunk of possibility of architecture that is interesting.
Gregory, did I hear correctly that it's 250 miles in diameter?
Yes, and 785,000 square miles of total surface.
All right, well, then the dialogue at the beginning is really misdirection, because it's not so much a threat to individuals, it's a threat to the Earth. It's the only architectural project I've ever seen that poses a threat to the Earth, because the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs was anywhere from 7 to 50 miles in diameter. So if this slips out of orbit, I don't know if it's big enough to affect the tides even, but maybe it is. But this is actually you created a monument that's a threat to the Earth itself, which is remarkable.
But it's an interesting reading, but I never really put Victor as a threat. I just found it really interesting to specify those things and specify how big it is and what's its scale, just because it's so hard for us to like grasp it and understand it. And especially during the last stage of the project, I really spent some time thinking how ambiguous the notion of distance is, and what is too far and what is too close to us either way. And I can tell you how big Victor is, and I can tell you how far from Earth it is, but you'll never be fully able to understand the scale of it. And I'm not able to understand the scale of it. And I think there's something really interesting about not fully understanding it.
Yeah, I think that seems super interesting at the moment when we're kind of all constantly thinking about distance. And you know, I'm only just a hair over 5 foot, so I'm always like, okay, it's me plus a little, you know, like in terms of like what's allowed. And so you're always, I don't know, just thinking about this distance. And in general, I think this project, if one thing I see in it is that it's just visualizing a lot of the things that we are trying to imagine right now. So, and of course, this is just my reading, but it would be this place that we could go, which has this kind of oscillation between kind of comfort and respite and the promise of kind of a slowdown, but it also has these kind of beautiful kind of masks on it, which are a little bit reminiscent of like armor or something, right? That it needs to protect itself on some sides, and that when you go there, you're going to, there could be moments when you're very vulnerable and other moments when you're very protected. And then I guess like the last element of that would be the particles, and, you know, kind of coming up into architecture in the late 90s and early 2000s, like, you know, the modeling of particles meant one thing, but I think right now, looking at particles within a project like this, to me, it has a lot to do with like the visualization of danger, and things that we know to be there, but that we don't want to confront very often. And so I think that the project seems to like oscillate very much in with the emotions that we're having right now, which is we sort of all are on Victor in a way.
Yeah, it's funny that in this moment, you have a planet, a little subplanet that we need to, that's how you go somewhere to get away and be alone and feel safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're right, Christy, we're all on our little Victors now.
Okay, Gregory, thank you. Good job.
Thank you.
We're gonna keep rolling.
Hi, everyone. My name is Saleh, and I'll just start playing my project for you guys. So that was the project, and I think really quickly I just wanted to show a few turntables, a bit more in detail what I didn't really show in the film. I guess, how I was trying to think of or process and model these things. This was one of the earliest insect toy combinations that I did. Some didn't even make it to the film, but then I started to get a flow of how I could sort of combine different aspects of insects, toys, what sort of buttons I wanted, what would make them fly, how would they carry these orbs, what sort of accessory they kind of had, whether it's a key or those bunny ears, or a backpack just to have it sort of character, and what elements would be recycled. And then from then I started to have like the plant systems or the sort of ecosystem that goes with it. This was sort of the rebirth chamber itself to recycle it, and the extension to sort of build the tree for which the mother sort of slots herself into and gives life to the playground for her child. Yeah, that's it.
I really
gorgeous.
enjoyed this one. I found that it appeals to a lot of things that amuse me, which is gadgetry, and I think it's a. I wonder what video games this guy plays, because that's in there somewhere as well. Not that I watch them very often, but it's really, I find it in a curious way quite refreshingly literal. It's stuff and things, and they do things, and they sort of replicate nature, but they don't when they don't want to. And it's also, it amuses me because some of them have quite recherche components. I mean, you know, stuff taken almost out of the kitchen or the Meccano set. And then, you know, some of it is as we see, inspired by drones, it's inspired by life, and then it's manipulating it. But it's in the great tradition of what I call stuff and things, and the guy fiddling with gadgets, you know, playing with this thing, and then eventually, and like you showed the earlier version, which had its own amusement and its own comparison, and then you refined it or you changed it, and it's just this sort of rather coy world between the or something that's taken straight out of the Wallace and Gromit head. You know, it's full of references, I think, to people who like watching. And the key, there's the key there. I mean, for goodness sake, and the hairdryer at the end of it with a propeller. It's got a certain sort of nuance which our culture here has been full of in the early days of artists borrowing from gadgetry, funny things with clockwork that exploded, or you know, that kind of stuff. So that's built into it as well. I can very much read the taste of the author, and I think it appeals to people like me who are more interested in gadgets than lupins.
Just your degree of fluency in the animation, the camera movement, editorial is super impressive, like super impressive. So congratulations on that. It's beautiful. I mean, you know, it's very, very impressive work. Just in terms of the filmmaking, animation, render. What did you do it in?
I did a few softwares. I modeled in ZBrush and Maya, Cinema 4D to animate, and Octane to render.
Octane, yeah.
Yeah.
Well done.
Thank you.
Very, very beautiful. I actually like to animate myself, and I really love the complexity and all the corners of the animation, the landscape, the characters. And I don't. One of the things that I like the less actually are these sort of steampunk type of funny details, because I think, like in the project, there is moments of that I don't know if I'm imagining this, but there are moments that trigger material processes that are somehow mechanic, biological, electronic, and there are certain events And I remember reading in the studio presentation that notion of an event. And there's certain moments that actually you can imagine certain process of construction of self-growing structures that could be, I don't know, viral or bacteriological, or some kind of process that trigger possibility of growing architectonic techniques more than, I don't know, building and putting stuff together like you guys do all the time. And I love the detail, the sensibility of the liquid, the light, because I don't know, maybe you think that there is this little machine that use UV light, and then that thing get hard, and then there is this bacteriological thing that's another type of process, and I don't know. There is a lot of, it's a beautiful animation, and it triggers a lot of material, building, you know, thinking.
I love the way in which, Sela, that you've coupled each of the characters in the scene with a specific form of motility, like the way they move. There's that one moment where the scarab is kind of carrying the orb, and you just get the sense that this thing has a certain payload, and there's gravity, and the way it banks and moves, exquisite. And then I really enjoy at the end when you pull these out as turntables, and we see, I can almost imagine the prototypes of them that, you know, cast out of rubber or something, different materials. It's like a whole universe. I mean, I really feel like you could have a whole exhibition with this, like playing the film and then these pieces, each character presented. Fantastic work, really. Congratulations.
I think, Saleh, I mean, it's amazing. I've seen this before. And then I mean, I see it now. And it's truly, I mean, I agree with everybody. I think that it's quite unique, and then it's perfectly executed. I would say, and a little bit, this is a little bit internal because it has to do with your thesis of futures, you know. So I imagine this world that you created. And I mean, I understand Fabian's point on the gadget. I mean, like you have Peter Cook and Fabian a little bit going back, like, is it good or is it bad? Because I think the gadgets are the things that we can more clearly recognize. They are ready-made. I would say the rest is almost created, and this has a little bit of, I think, a Harry Potter, you know, link, and a little bit of the Star Wars. So I think it's full of ready-mades of things that we've seen before, even because we've seen them in person or because we've seen them in other narratives. So I would grow them. This one, I love this one with the toys mixture. I think that if you hybridize them more and own them more, I think it would be great. But I mean, they're amazing. It's just that I would own them more. And the other thing that I think about your ground, you know, you have the gadgets and then you have your ground. About your ground, remember that we talked about the Octavia Butler as a science fiction, that it was a unique science fiction that she presented in the sense that the world is matter, like the world, the future world that she's inventing is, you know, the ground is flesh, the walls are flesh, you know, like it's this. So it would have been quite interesting that the ground somehow will start to move, you know, like it's not the ground as we know it, it's the stable ground that we know. It is a ground that is life, you know. So like this moment that right now is like a landscape, it actually wouldn't be, it's not really, you know. So I think that then everything is upside down, you know, like then nature is not nature and the small, you know. So what is gravity here? I would challenge your world a bit more. And I see the things moving, but they still quite referential to the world as we know it. And I think that you might have, you know, like in the way that Octavia Butler invents this universe, like nothing is familiar, yet everything is quite familiar because flesh, we know flesh, but we know skin, we know So I think that in a way, I'm missing that to really take it further, you know, in the world that you're creating.
Hey, Salim, it's John Hoke. I think I saw this project, it must be at least 2 months ago down in LA. And, you know, I just commend you on lots of things that the other jurors have said. You know, the thing that strikes me is you have a narrator's voice. There's a story arc. And
I think we lost you, John. I think.
Maybe I'll make a comment until John comes back, and then I'll defer to him. Salah, something was very unsettling about this to me, and I just figured out what it is. I guess this is supposed to be a swamp of some sort, but the whole feeling to me is one of an undersea landscape. And even the way that the machines are moving around, they dart suddenly kind of like fish. And those translucent plant-like forms remind me of kelp in a way. And so there's a kind of dislocation here. And then I noticed your film's called Mother Nature. So I wonder, making a statement about nature here, or was that just a community? Some sort of statement about the sea as the origin of nature, or?
Are you cut in the last sentence?
Oh, I covered the microphone by mistake. I wonder, first of all, if the sea was in the back of your mind when because it's a very original landscape. I don't think I've seen something quite like this before.
Yeah, no, the sea was completely not in my mind at all. I guess when I was doing the movements, I think those little sticks that moved very subtly, that was just to have some sort of background movement. But I can see the reading that it looks like the flow underwater. And I think the title of Mother Nature kind of really specifically ties to this that you see right now, her, I guess, for the final scene specifically.
And then maybe I'm the only one who had trouble figuring out what exactly was going on. The life forms are being recycled after they're sucked in?
Yeah, exactly. The little, at least the more tangible, the more like physical toy aspects are recycled and then recreated into different types or combined with different toys.
Okay.
So John Hawks and power problem. So he's texting me his comment, he loves your work. So he's gonna try to figure it out and get back, but he loved the project. So anyway.
Thank you.
From John Hawk.
So my comment would be, I think I remember having the conversation about the toy-like helmet at midterm, which I think is, even though everything has like developed and it is really exquisite, I'm still such a fan of how those two ears, or, you know, I'm sure everyone can see something different, but the kind of bunny ears, the kind of floppy implied quality that it gives is just so, for me, it's what holds the tension between this incredibly playful toy-like thing. And it also, it helps to balance that gadgetry aspect. So I guess my comment would just be, I think he might need a few more friends. I think he seems like pretty lonely in this world, and I feel like it needs to have some of these gadgets need to have other ways to. I mean, he gained some, right? I guess it was like that dinosaur at one point. But anyway, it's really, really beautiful. It definitely reminds me. There's an artist, I'll send you the link, who kind of paints vinyl toys and kind of reassembles them. I think they're
Greg Lynn.
What?
Greg
No,
Lynn.
more smaller. And there's an exhibition of it up right now at Giant Robot in Sawtell, but I'm sure we'll have to wait a month or so to see it. But I'm going to put the link, and I think you'll really like it. Definitely scroll to image 6.
All right.
What it does is it kind of uses your bunny ears and it uses it as feet. Anyway, I just think the assembly of the toys along with these gadgets and then this exquisite way, these all feel like they've been like airbrushed and have this kind of vinyl like quality. It's really beautiful. So thank you.
I think it really cheers one up, this scheme. most cheerful, and it brings a smile to your face.
That is not a minor thing these days.
Absolutely.
That's right.
I think, Saleh, we should quit while we are ahead, when everybody seems to love the project. If we give it more time, people eventually start to find problems. So terrific. Let's move to the next one.
Hi, my name is Isabel, and I will share the video.
Protesters filled streets in neo-bunkers across Venezuela on Wednesday in a show of strength and hope against the government. The opposition hopes the march will pressure the electoral authorities into allowing them to launch the second petition needed to trigger the recall referendum as soon as possible. 2019 was a year of emerging movements across the globe, unleashing public fury at a global scale that have produced an emerging global political culture. Vastly different protests have borne common slogans and symbols. Diverse protests have also adopted common tactics, organizing with social media technology and wearing masks to hide identities. That's when neo-bunkers came into game. One of the most successful emerging technologies was the origin of the neo-bunkers. Neo-bunkers were a solution to the 2019 social and cultural problems and also the global warming. The main idea was to generate an infrastructure capable of purifying the air and also act as a shelter. Neo-bunkers are infrastructures that grow, with the ability to transform, disrupt, and adapt to unexpected environments, functioning as a shelters for its users, creating a new normal. The emerging of the neo-bunkers have altered the tactics, tools, and structure of civil resistance. The main function is to serve as protective infrastructures for citizens in any situation. It relies on our desires for justice, shelter, and hope. With our actual coronavirus crisis, neo-bunkers have also served as isolation infrastructures and environment purifiers. Protests are becoming part of ordinary political engagement. That's why we need neo-bunkers as a supportive infrastructure for our citizens. Neo-bunkers are inventories of fragments, protest elements, color, sound, and perception. I feel safe with neo-bunkers around. We feel protected. It is important to highlight the fact that neo-bunkers emerged from a very difficult social and cultural situation that led the solution, not only for protests, but also for different concerns that the world is facing these days. Crisis moments create opportunity, ignite our greatest creativity, and force us to think outside the norm. Reporting for CNN, Adriana Finoli.
So I'm open to comments and answer any.
Yes, you call these bunkers and you associate them with resistance, which is interesting because a lot of times bunkers are associated with the opposite, right? I think of Albania, Berlin, in an earlier time. What's the aptitude for resistance of these bunkers?
I mean, the original idea was to explore this topic and how to mitigate and how to overcome this complex situations. And I thought that maybe if we could have like some shelters for protesters or for citizens. Like at the beginning, I was thinking, like I had this idea of protests and then how I could create an infrastructure that could support the citizens. And then it was like, in the process of the project, it was like start to transform into other ideas, as like coronavirus, like serving as shelters, as as protective infrastructures, as isolation sites. So I think it started with this complex issue, and then it was transforming into other functions as well.
It's cool. Now's the time for neobunkers. But so where do they come from? I think there's a shot in your piece where we see one falling from the sky. Are they like, is it a miracle, or
No.
or is it something that we've generated, or is it from nature?
It is biotechnology, like modified biologics. They usually grow, like from the human just plants it and it will grow.
Okay, so it needs to be planted.
Yeah.
What about the color scheme? Can you talk about the red, white, and blue?
Yeah. At the beginning, this was like the concept, the topic was related to the Venezuelan protests, and the colors that I used in this specific video were linked to the flag, the Venezuelan flag, that are yellow, red, and blue. So I wanted to keep that sense of relation with the topic, even though it was transforming in the way somehow.
Because I think maybe what could be sort of another dimension to this would be that in different settings, maybe those colors would mutate to reflect some kind of, and I don't mean context in the conventional way that we think about context, but in that case, it might be a flag, it might be a political issue. In another one, it might be an environmental issue. It might have something to do with what that environment looks like, if it's an arid environment or there's sandstorms, or so these could take on, I think, different sort of aesthetic qualities depending upon where they're implemented. I think that would be, a productive thing to consider.
There's a I can't remember, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating this, but there's definitely an aspect of this film, particularly at the moment when you have the red ones going into the water, that reminds me a lot of the artist Roxy Payne, and the sort of extrusion machines, and it just makes me think that when you say they grow, and when Peter asked like where do they come from, I mean, I wonder if they could grow not just from like the ground up, but those moments that they would be kind of dropping from something, and that they would maybe accumulate from the other way around. Anyway, that's definitely just totally a riff on the kind of Roxy's extruders, but there seems to be a lot going on here. Maybe we could challenge how things grow, and maybe they grow sideways and from the top, and not just from the ground.
There is something interesting when a blob becomes political, I think. Actually, this is one of the first time that I see it. One of the things that it make me associate is that there is actually this type of material that they design. I think that actually it is actually a material that you can actually project into a crowd. It will glue people together, and it is a sort of way of controlling crowds. And it was an idea of substituting water cannons to control the masses with this type of sticky material. And somehow this sort of negative association made me think about your project. I mean, what my problem is with the scale of all these, let's say, political and let's say activities in the street, and the huge scale of these things that look like come out of nowhere. Like somehow I see more the the scale of stepping on a bubble gum more than these huge amorphous things, although they are beautiful. And I like how, let's say, they attend to orchestrate all this thing together. That is like the events in the street, the protest, the imaginary, the whole thing. But I think it needs a lot of digestion in order to.
I think you're a very, very kind panel. I'm going to be a bit sour on this one. I think it's very vague. I mean, the best projects that we've seen so far have had, if I can use an odd word, a certain precision of what it is that you need to read, and uses more than one device. It's one device playing along with another device, or something that develops into something else, or is fed by, or is inserted into. So here it's blobs. Yeah, if you like blobs, it's nice blobs. But if we didn't have the political narrative, it's blobs, and I don't find it gripping me. It's blobs, and then there's a political narrative running alongside. Sorry to be the sour person, but I have to say what I think, and I don't find it. It's blobs. Sorry, guys.
Okay, if we don't have any other comments, we will move on.
I think I will rethink the idea of the stepping on bubblegum.
I mean, look, every comment, every criticism is always fair. I think everybody think. I give her kudos for trying to figure it out, to marry two things that are not so easy to say, like you, Fabian, mentioned. So from where the project started to where it goes. So I think that is of a value of the conversation, but I think she's aware of the shortcomings of the projects and the struggle of the projects, and to figure out what will be the right scale and all that. But nevertheless, I think the Roxy Paint suggestion, and Chris is sending you in the chat, Isabella, I think is a good one for you to look at it. I think there's a methodological aspect of that. Anyway, good job. Let's move to the next one.
Hi guys, how's it going? I'm Aditya, and let me share my screen so that I can play the video first and then I can talk about it. Sorry. All right. So what you guys just saw is what I like to call parks of time. And the inspiration to that was, so whenever we look at an object up till now, it's been basically frozen in that moment. There has been no sort of movement across a timeline like you see in this video. So every time we put an object on a timeline, we're presented with all the different states of this object that it exists in all at once, collapsed onto this one thing that you see at the bottom of the screen as a video. So what I want to explore in terms of parks is the ability of these parks to fantasize, to give control to the user as to what state it exists in. So the user would theoretically be able to move the park around like that in time, not in space, right? So say you're using the park in a way, and I ask you to go into that space, or you want to go into that space, there is physically no way to go there. So typically what you would do in such a scenario in this park is move forward in time when that space would exist. So the transformation takes place, and then move backwards is what I found more interesting. So at this point, as I said, the park fantasizes about the user, giving the user the ability to access all those moments and experience each and every one of them individually. As you can see further in the video, where there are some frozen moments over here. So that's one moment out of that entirety of that object's life that exists. So when these parks are not experiencing individually, these things exist in New York on top of skyscrapers and rooftops of buildings among the water tanks. And their time is mapped onto the timeline of the day. So yeah.
Adi, was there a soundtrack? Because I didn't hear the soundtrack.
I can have it again.
It did have a soundtrack?
Yes. You didn't hear the soundtrack?
Did anyone else have that issue?
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, there is a kind of,
it's very faint.
yeah, a kind of environmental sound.
Yeah, a bit like a windstorm or a...
Very, very faint.
Yeah.
You have to crank it up all the way up.
Yeah, it's nice to see this in a more final state. Since you had me in class, you've been showing me snippets of this throughout the semester. I want to suggest that there's two different things that work at cross purposes. One of them is the idea of a four-dimensional architecture that's changing across time. Some part of it endures and the other parts are shifting. But then you brought up a different aspect of this, which was the ability of the user to choose the configuration it has. So then it becomes something different. It becomes more of a menu of thousands of different options for the particular configuration of a building, which means it will stop moving once they've made that choice.
No, that's if they make that choice for it to stop moving.
Oh.
You could experience it while it's moving as well. That's
okay.
Mapped in New York throughout the day, right? So it's moving still continuously until the user's interacting.
I just want to suggest that maybe the user choice detracts from the power of the project, which is the emphasis it places on an object's endurance through time with many changes.
Yeah.
Because as soon as the person has the choice to pick one frame and keep it there, one of the most powerful aspects of the project is paralyzed. Well,
you're saying if one's interacting with it, it's frozen in a way, and there's no choice for the others.
Or at least it could become frozen if they choose it so. Whereas I kind of like the idea that it's in your face and it forces you to confront the temporal dimension without choice. Maybe that's just my preference.
That's a good point. But I doubt anybody would want to keep it frozen in one place like that.
Like, look, I like it like this. I want to walk under these cubes here. I like that angle perfectly. No, I just can't imagine wanting that personally.
Eventually, you're gonna get bored of it, though, right? Anyway.
I wanna welcome Brett Steele. He just joined us.
Yeah.
I'll reintroduce you, Brett. So feel free to jump anytime.
No need. Just watch it. Just watch it.
There is something that, I don't know. I always say that for cinematics, the problem with cinematics is you always have to project it, or a screen have to show it, segregate it. The moment that the screen or the segregator become as active as what is segregated, cinematics will become interesting. Until that moment, is only, projections. Meaning that if I see this project as architectonic process in evolution, where you are thinking on systems of becoming structures, that could be interesting, because there is a lot of examples of moving topography, or this one, for instance, where you have this sort of force that is eroding and creating an interior space. But then you have this ridiculous little chair, like you're supposed to sit there. It becomes like entertainment. So the core of the work is almost like architectural alchemy. And it's presented like if it's entertainment. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I would like to just to get rid of those funny little chairs and to really be in that shit, and to try to really see what could happen with those processes.
Got it.
I think the intellectual idea of looking at architecture as something that can metamorphose, and that any moment in its metamorphosis is relevant if we want it to be. I think that appeals to me greatly, and is something that's always been a dream. But the film as it stands, before you gave the explanation, I sat here looking at it, and I was trying to read what it was about. I wondered, was there something very particular about sitting it on top of the high rises? And then I was expecting it to have some kind of effect upon the high rises as some kind of parasite, but that didn't happen. Now I was looking at the plane upon which it sat and the figuration of that. I was trying to think, is there something I should be reading into this? Then I started thinking of ice, though it's a globular thing, so it doesn't form like ice, but it has that quality. Were you trying to make a sort of ice architecture? Why was it white? Whereas some of the projects that we've been looking at, again, have used a composite of different surfaces or constituencies, so that there's another game going on. So this assumes that the architecture is fairly consistent, and that therefore in its growth and change, the same kind, it decomposes or recomposes, but that it is of the same nature. Whereas what would become very interesting is if that's the actual nature of the stuff metamorphosed, as does material when it takes on a patina, when it starts to decay. So there are all sorts of. Once I knew the story, and I was waiting for you to say, what the hell is this thing about? Okay, switching into that. I think you could do far more with it. I think that so I sort of slightly share the issue with the two little chairs, and it's all very nice and it's all very white and it glitters. I think it could be much more, we've seen some pretty sinister stuff earlier on. I think this too could be much more sinister. It does not just decompose in a sort of equal way, but it takes on other, as it decomposes or recomposes, it takes on other values, other nuances, other colorations, maybe other forms. I mean, I'm just willing it to go further. And then I think you can't just plonk it on top of towers and say, oh, that happens to be where it is, but it could be in the back garden. I want more from it. I like the proposition. Now you've told me what it is. I think it can go further and get really then quite exciting.
Thank you, Peter.
I was going to say, I agree with Graham that I think I was sort of disappointed the moment you stopped it and then you kind of did the rewind. And, you know, either I would build that into the film, so like showing some user who is changing and maybe reversing time with it, or just have it be like you know, in a way, I think you're designing weather here. It's almost like you've created a weather forecast and we just have to deal with it somehow. And I think that that is more powerful than like when you stopped it and you kind of controlled it and exited the narrative and like it was playing at a different speed, and then it became more like a demonstration piece. And I prefer to stay inside the magic of the film, like the cinematic space. There is something though, strangely, when in the top views of these things, they almost remind me of teeth and the enamel on the teeth decaying and kind of that, then it gets kind of has this like horrific edge as well as being, you know, like from this view, they really have that quality of like the enamel.
Yeah, Marceline, I was thinking the same thing. Sorry, I wanted to say something earlier, but there's like massive sirens going by. It's super loud. Hope you don't hear it. But the kind of molar quality was kind of phenomenal on some of the top views. And then it all of a sudden took those particles from something that seemed like raked sand and very meditative to something that was like scraped plaque on a tooth. And I thought that was, I kind of liked that direction. Maybe we've just been tainted from everything we've seen today, and then it's a kind of wanting to kind of get to the underbelly of the sinister side. But I think maybe another bias of mine might be that I think you could keep some of the rooftop, the accoutrements that are on a rooftop. You know, you know, the air handling units, the helicopter ports, the parapets, like all that stuff would give you some resistance for this weather. I like how Marceline says this, for this weather to have some resistance, and it would kind of pile up in corners and it would maybe have an infinity edge on one side or something. I mean, that's part there. I'm just kind of leaning, I went from observation to kind of maybe a wish list, but I think that rooftops are an incredible place to think of landscape. I think increasingly as we begin to think about circulating in the air, well, maybe not now, but something I would think of as you move forward. I think that taking on some of the things that already exist there would be pretty wonderful.
During the studio, we were looking at Central Park as an example, and I just was wondering what if, like, it could be like a framework of Central Park, but on the rooftops of skyscrapers instead. That was the idea behind the rooftop.
Right. You should, I don't know, have you ever been to the Met in New York?
No.
You should look up rooftop of the Met in New York. It's kind of phenomenal because you're on this rooftop terrace with like the balustrades and all the things that go with the architecture, but you're almost at the eye level of the top of the tree line, so the trees seem like a puffy floor. It actually is very fitting for a lot of the videos we've seen today.
Thank you.
Yeah, I actually appreciated the benches because until I noticed them, I had no sense of scale. Something needed to be there until you put it at the top of the skyscraper, and then I got a better sense of scale. But I needed something in that first shot to give me a sense of how it compared to the human body size.
Okay, cool work, man.
Thank you.
We have to keep moving. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Yu Ting from MARC 1. I will introduce my design concept of this project after playing the video. Hope you enjoy my video. This project is not simply making architecture, but building the neural world, telling fairy stories and dragging you into the mysterious atmosphere. There are multiple different moments, different chapters in the whole story, and each chapter has its community. Fabric and no fabric, tablecloths and not tablecloths. In the virtual world and in the real world, heavy tones and the little things in it. Contrasts create magic feelings. In this film, there are many worlds in different huge creatures, or colorful clouds sleeping on the water, or smoke like explosion, or even emissive lanterns lighting the void universe. The fairy tale quality and friendly mysticism cooperate with cinematic narrative. This project relies on sublime, but not devoid from reality. Thank you.
I think she gives the full clue by saying it's a fairy story. The aesthetic, you can't get away from the fact that the aesthetic conjures up those sometimes East European sort of, but though she's not East European, but there's a certain kind of sweet, coy, escapist sweetness, which is a certain aesthetic, and I don't mind it. I accept it, and then I don't get what the cat and the cactus are. Well, that goes off on another tangent. But it's also quite sweet. It's I could imagine that kids would love this. You know, they wouldn't need to know any kind of narrative, but it has that it has a certain delicate coloration, a certain aesthetic that I've seen in children's books of a certain, maybe, you know, the turn of the last century, and in Northern and Eastern Europe in particular, though, as I say, she's a country. And she then signs off. There's a very nice clue in her end signature. She says designer. Now, I haven't seen that word used in major architectural schools. Nobody admits to being a designer, and I think that it's perfectly reasonable. I think one has to take this project at its own level, and the glittery quality, the almost table decoration quality that we get sometimes when we see the little silver trees. I mean, you can almost touch it, you almost know it. And I don't think that necessarily runs against it. It doesn't have the gravity of some of the earlier projects. It doesn't have the challenge. It is escapist. And it's just as one enjoyed the gadgets, but they had lots of overtones. Here, it's quite refreshing just for a moment to go off into fairyland and say, ah, yes, it's a dream. And I can almost feel the tinsel. It's not a necessarily pejorative comment. You must take.
But then I think what changes that fairyland quality is that final scene where you go into the backstory of this whole thing, and we see multiple screens, and we understand that we're not immersed in this fairy tale. It's like this complete construct. And I thought that was really powerful. You're conjuring many different atmospheres in here. And I love the fact that it goes from that, odd, like checkered tablecloth with milk or something, or resin spilled over it. I happen to love the scene with the cat as well, because it's sort of like this whole universe exists around this one character just sitting there on the top of this hill. And then when you pull out from that scene and you have like multiple other instances of it. And then I imagine like, what if some world like this existed for every creature in the universe? I mean, it's pretty amazing. It's sort of like just a different way of thinking about the space that surrounds us. And, if that world exists just for that one plastic toy cat, what's the world that we're sitting in? And so I would really commend you. I think that the different environments are pretty amazing, and the way sometimes they don't fit and it's almost like mismatch. And that I think is its real compelling quality. Thank you.
Following up on that, Yuting, could you say a little more about this room where the video screens are? Because not only do I see an observer there, it doesn't even seem very well configured for an observer to be in there. So who are these displays for, if anyone?
I want to say that in this exhibition room, it shows that my design is a collection, like with the same logic, same form, but applied to maybe different area, applied to different atmosphere. So in this exhibition room, you can see this collection. And you know this is totally virtual, but like you can see everything in this room.
Okay, but there's all kinds of machinery and equipment or unevenness to the floor, so it doesn't look like a place where one would normally store a collection. So I'm just curious how you chose to design that room.
Yeah, I want to, like, I don't want to tell the time of this story. Maybe it's in the past, maybe it's in the future. But I think machine always exists in the history. So it depends on your understanding what time it is. It's just like create an atmosphere.
I like that. I don't know where that say come from, but it says, I'm living in a nightmare. I thought it was a dream. Because it is funny how we judge dreams or nightmare. And you know, this project have a little bit of one and a little of the other. Sometimes they look like a nightmare, sometimes like a dream, or like architecture dreaming itself that is in a nightmare. One of the things that to me is actually interesting, because obviously this project is totally virtual, but I'm always interested about seeing computer effects and how those could be thought in the real world. Like for instance, those kind of Boolean edges and how the mappings and all these techniques that we have in the virtual world and how little we use them to produce processes that will be not an illustration, but actually they will trigger more interesting things in the real world. Those, for instance, those sort of splashes, it will be a very interesting thing to see. This is what I don't understand. I understand the whole dream, but then this looks like a tower of control where somebody, or I don't know, some kind of alien culture is seen. And I cannot put together this sort of orthogonal world of when you see through this sort of more soft or aleatorial type of space.
The exhibition room is like from the designer. He would like me. I was watching the collection of the design, and yeah, like I was watching the virtual world that I created.
I like you, Ting. You kind of presented the project twice. We were able to watch the wonderful 2.5-minute clip first with the soundtrack, and then a second time as it was looping, you were doing a voiceover, and I kind of liked the compare and contrast opportunity it provided. And I think following on from Peter's comments, which point to the possibility that we're looking at a kind of fairy tale as much as we are an architectural project. And I like it much more as a fairy tale than it's just as pictures of a fairy land. I think one of the things about fairy tales is they really do have a kind of story structure to them. And I think the way in which, with this kind of a project that you could craft the overlay between the narration or the storytelling with your voice and the storytelling with the cinematography and the visuals would be a really interesting project that would suggest the second version of your presentation way more interesting than just the ambient music soundtrack overlaid on some interesting visuals. And one of the things that the fairy tale project opens up as a possibility is that the project is also a kind of allegory. Like fairy tales, it's telling a story about something other than itself, but it's using the structure of scary characters, funny looking, imaginative landscapes to try and let us see the world we know in a different way. And one of those worlds that we see very differently, thanks to a project like this, is something like an architectural design project. You know, that this is almost a kind of caricature of, in a really interesting, I find almost kind of creepy way at times. But it takes all of those tropes of a conventional presentation, like a figure-ground relationship, and it literally turns them upside down. You know, those more familiar kind of things that would fill an architectural story or project, and it makes them see it through a really unique kind of lens that really does make the project an allegory in some way. And the only thing it would suggest for me is to really speak much more directly, not as a kind of form of commentary, but as a sort of active interplay between the language or the verbal account and all of the beautiful visuals that are sitting alongside, such that you would even choreograph the script and the sentences that are being said such that they really fit in an incredibly tight way with the action on the screen. And probably the best industry for that, given that it's so vast, is the industry not of filmmaking so much as trailer making for films, where, you know, a sort of 2-hour story needs to be told in 90 seconds or a minute 20 or something, and that becomes almost entirely the focus for a completely different kind of project making. The project really suggests that possibility for me.
Thank you. Good job. We have to keep moving. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Ting.
So Yutin, I was going to do a comment. My daughter is playing piano, so I cannot. So I'm going to send you a chat message, okay? So I'll send you my comment on chat, okay?
The music sounds nice, Florencia. I hear it.
Yes, not the trombone this time.
So,
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Many years to get to that point, Christine.
Right.
Okay, who's next? Rachel.
Yeah, hey, it's
Rachel,
me.
You're next.
Yeah, and Rachel's gonna play the movie, so just take it away. My name is Christopher, by the way.
In the 18th century Europe, the English garden replaced the formal French garden of the 17th century. Where the French garden was based on symmetry and hierarchy, similar to the Baroque planning of Versailles and Paris, the English garden was inspired by French and English painters, who in their depiction of the natural landscapes of the rural, proposed for far more nuanced and lush relationships to its visitors. This has been the way we've designed gardens for more than 200 years. With the impasse of theme parks in Europe and the States in the late 1800s, a new lifestyle of entertainment was created. The theme parks featured various kinds of attractions, from rides, games, a tunnel of love and leisure. The theme park embodied the fantastical and challenged the unnatural elements of the everyday. It quickly became the cornerstone of any modern metropolitan civilization. Where perhaps the tools and techniques of today allows for alternative models of leisure and entertainment, as well as inventing, seeing and re-seeing our already existing models. What we encounter is the creation of absurdities, a seemingly strange world of plasticity, where nuance of colors, shapes and events determines the perception of reality. How does the digital rendering become more familiarized through the various known materials and textural conditions? Something I explore through the term digital seasoning. Can the rendered objects tell us something about our natural world in the same way the fakeness of a theme park does about our ordinary lives? In this theme park, without a theme, there's no rules, no fee, and no limitation of ownership.
Thank you.
Can you say something about the choice of soundtrack?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's very, I guess, straightforward. It's the sound of a theme park and the sound of a garden with birds. And I think the reason for it, I mean, is I guess part of the idea of like trying to create a new image or a new idea about a potential landscape that could behave in this way.
The theme of the Luna Park or theme park, I think, is a very strong one. I think it's an intriguing one to take. And I was looking, as you mentioned it, past the actual objects and trying to think in my mind as one of my first childhood sort of encounters with expressionist architecture was actually in a very, very small Luna Park when I was about 12 years old in a seaside place. And then I'm thinking of how you said it's in Santa Monica, and you briefly showed Santa Monica Pier, which of course has been much, much, much discussed in architectural circles as a model of the, you know, in Banham's terms of the megastructure and all sorts of things. But in my back of my mind, I kept thinking of the Kursaal in Copenhagen, which I suspect from your name you might be vaguely familiar with, and where that is inside a wall in the middle of the city. So it has very much, in a sense, a parallel significance in terms of the rest of the city as does the pier in Santa Monica. It's right in there in the middle, but surrounded by a wall. And the first time you go there, but perhaps as a child, you have no idea what you might encounter. Very little of it, apart from the helter-skelter, pokes up above the wall. And so this, I think, in your scheme, the base with the rods is very, very important, because it's a sort of although your stuff shows above it, it keeps reminding me of this notion of the encasement, and then the magic happens, in your case above, but within the thing. And I think that that's important to the project. And then I'm wondering about the actual forms. So I come back to what is the particular significance of that particular combination of forms. And here, I'm not quite so convinced. I think you collected together some stuff that you can make or you rather like, but it's missing that extra statement or explanation or discovery, which is where some particular forms take on a particular magic. Like in the traditional theme park, there's scary stuff, there's sweet stuff, there's kind of moving stuff, there's just sort of confrontation of things that you're not familiar with. And I feel it needs a slightly richer vocabulary. The hedgehog, which I now the SCI-Arc hedgehog, which I've been on books of before. So you've appropriated the SCI-Arc hedgehog, these coming up on the screen now, these tubes are probably more than I'm claiming for them. I think they're very intriguing. I wonder if different things might happen inside those tubes. But the hedgehogs, they're sort of too big and too consistent for my money.
I also wonder, Christopher, if the backgrounds, because there's sort of a pink aura to the whole thing, and then the background is also pink. And somehow I wonder if I would agree sort of with Peter that maybe more contrasty kinds of aesthetics could come into play, where this feels very well matched, like the pieces sort of fit together as an ensemble. But I imagine there might be some things that produce a sort of discord. And I mean, some of the associations with the theme park, like cotton candy, come to mind. And then I wonder, like, what if you got this really, like the furry things, I think could become much more sort of like cotton candy and kind of goopy. And I mean, it's kind of very beautifully modeled and very carefully modeled, but I almost want to see a little bit more contrast.
I mean, one place that contrast might come from would be the beach in Santa Monica where you've positioned it. I think I kept wanting to see, like, to imagine this thing interacting with the one thing that draws everybody to that particular piece of sand, which is, of course, the sunsets on the edge of a continent that happens there and only there. And it would be terrific, like to just embed it in that one moment over the course of 24 hours where your project would come alive when the sun hits it a certain way, would like attract more people than Burning Man probably most summers. You know, it would be insane to try and see the thing, to see what the effects of it, because of your use of on the one hand, really absorptive materials, but on the other, super shiny, reflective stuff. It would become like a beacon for every surfer on the planet to try and figure out. It would be like their Stonehenge or something, you know, like it wouldn't have an explanation beyond just the effects it could create. And there's one or two little clips where you give us a hint of it actually sitting at a particular GPS location on the planet. But, you know, that might be the thing that would animate it in the way that Marceline is suggesting, to just dedicate yourself to describing a project like this with as much hyper realism as the project, you know, suggests would bring it alive, would be really interesting. And, you know, beg questions about what level of resolution is enough with a project like this. You know, it would be a thing that we would inevitably, a bit like the Santa Monica Pier, you'd be reading the title, the high and low tides in relation to it. And, you know, it would have all sorts of lived effects that would be really terrific, given your ability to describe it as a sort of pure object dropped from outer space. Once it enters atmosphere and lands at that particular moment, that would also be a project you could really dedicate yourself to, that would have terrific and probably unexpected discoveries or effects, you know, in your description of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. No, I think it's a really good point. To me, I think starting this studio as well of not making architecture is a bunch of series of just making things and adding things and trying to make, like, defamiliarize myself with the kind of tools that were given, and thinking about how the images could be portrayed back into the landscape. I think for sure that's the part that I would like it to go further, is to like see how it would adapt into a context. That's at least what I suggest. So I think the ultimate thing would like be to like have it tangible in some sense.
There's a terrific essay that Ralph Rugoff wrote 20 years ago called Theme Park Slums, which was his very English tour of all the really low budget theme parks in LA outside the famous ones, which are all the sort of bad little Danish towns and European cities that are built on the edges of parking lots or shopping malls, which embed the idea of a supermarket, of a theme park into a city like LA in a completely different way, where the theme park isn't a sort of large, grand, abstract term, but a sort of lived experience. And what he's drawn to, just because of his own aesthetic, is the horrible material effects of those kind of places compared to the fantasy idealism of what they look like. But your project would fit nicely in that landscape of really, really bad theme parks in a city like LA, outside the famous ones that everybody wants to talk about.
I think there might have been also an opportunity to reflect some of that, you know, again, what Brett's saying, like some of the roughness or the dirtiness or the, you know, kind of corrupted a little bit by using the reflective areas, because there are times where the highly polished surfaces begin to reflect. And I think the question would be, what do we see in those reflections? And that might be where this kind of contrast level starts to come in. I mean, because I think your whole project begins by describing the contrast between the English garden and the French garden. And so that, I think, is a theme really to push through. I mean, I see it here, but it still feels like that the reflection could be used to do that. And maybe, I think Florencia just uploaded the balloons from Warhol.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I think that the Peter Cook said earlier, like how that silencio, how that there's too much continuity with material, I guess, the ground and the objects. But I see this as that kind of illusion of the balloon, you know? So I put that image of the Warhol helium balloons in a corner. I mean, he dropped them on an edge. Something was dropped. So the balloons are floating, and you know, he asked the visitors to walk in between balloons and let the balloons move. And so I think there's something, and you did an animation at the beginning that it looks like this was moving. It would have been great that this is helium, elevated helium balloons. They seem a little bit too thick. They seem more metallic. And what is nice about these balloons is that they're in between, but you can tell because sometimes, I mean, look at what Kunz has done with the idea of the balloon converted into a metal. So maybe your park has some of these animals that are, and some that are not. I think this is an interesting diagram, but the design, I think that I would have carried on further. All of the issues of the low and the high, the issues of the reflections that Marceline was talking about, Brett's point about what is the role of this, you know, gardens, even the one in LA. Rainer Bannon talking about this particular location. So I think that it's missing elements, but this surreal sense of this elevated objects that are quite large, almost like a big balloon, that it's, you know, helium or that is metal. I think that, you know, I think that it's a great idea. I think it stayed too much at the kind of primitive level. But it's, you know, the images are really beautiful.
Sorry. I like more the idea of how you start with the idea of the garden. And the thing that is more attractive is actually the hairy, like the hair-like volumes. Because I think, I mean, it makes me think about a really paradigmatic and very strange American artist, Richard Archbager, that is somehow known but not that known. And he created this type of like volumes that look like hairy type of fibrous type of, and those look like bushes too, like if you think a sort of metal version of a, you know, garden bush. I'm not really interested about all those reflective type of area. I will think more about the relation between the sort of organized type of tubes and the hair.
Yeah. I think that's also something that I agree.
Okay, Christopher, good job.
Yeah, thank you.
We have to keep moving. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Christopher, I just would want to say that I still think digital seasoning is one of my favorite terms that I've heard in the spring of 2020. So it stuck with me ever since, and I loved hearing it about it today again. So maybe just one small critique would be, I think it could use a little bit more grit. You know, I think that the seasoning part maybe sometimes seems too large. I think it could get to the more of the granular scale as well, more towards the hair that that was just being discussed. But I love that term. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Hi everyone, I'm Kumran. Rachel's gonna help me screen my video. Hopefully I can give you more grain and hair through mine. So that's ethereal. Ethereal is a spectacle seen in urban spaces throughout the world. No one truly understands what causes it, but it seems to like places where people least expect it to be. Most recently, it was seen taking over the New York City, and it appears in multiple places of the city at the same time. And some reasons, and for some reason, it seems to like public spaces, like streets, parks, subways, and even inside the subway car. People are confused about what makes it appear there. Could it be the concentration of COVID-19? Or is it merely there to entertain people? Ethereal always finds new ways to surprise people, and it loves stealing other people's identities, especially if you're friends from your design studio. We still don't know much behind Ethereal, except for the fact that it's a truly magical visual treat.
So this is another instance where I feel like there's really a kind of double quality that I'm grappling with, because on the one hand, there's exquisitely beautiful effects occurring with like the luminous effervescent light that gets like here, that gets thrown off of these tendrils. But then I see the masks of like almost like the casts of people's faces, and the expressions on the faces they're almost like death masks or something. And then you hear the cowbells and you start to think about the plague. And it's like very multi-layered. Again, I don't know if that was part of the intent. Is that the reference? Because I mean, halfway through I thought, this is the virus. You're modeling the virus in a sense. I don't know.
The beginning of the semester, I started playing around with the idea of mysterious and magical. So I started with the visual qualities of magic and what makes something truly visually magical. And then I started going into like the performance of magic. And that's where the element of surprise, like to expect something that was never really there, is what led to the layering of things, like with the sound choices and the way I ended the music, and even like the faces. It's like something really absurd that people don't expect it to go along with this thing. And that's the same quality that I try to continue with the video, where it almost like is like a fake overlay, where it has like a very exquisite like deep like character, but then the video is like almost like a completely different like of nature. And I haven't like tried to make it look hyper real, because I haven't added like the reflections and all of that. So it's supposed to feel like it's misplaced, and there's supposed to be that tension.
There is these pieces that the painter Franz Tehler did during the 90s, that I mean, people think that they are sculptures actually, but he cast splashes of aluminum intertwined with each other, and I don't think they are seen in general actually. I mean, it's really hard to see it, but you could see them online, and to have a little bit of and they're quite amazing, because he somehow it looked like he makes the aluminum, or I think it's aluminum actually, it's like explode in the air. And this is something that really reminds me this type of like particles and filaments and things, glowing. I love the whole dream situation. I am shocked by how beautiful and shimmering your aluminum or tungsten or whatever metal, and the depressing aluminum of all these subway system that is just so fucking depressing. I mean, there is a contrast between, I don't know, some kind of ambient architecture and a dream, and the depressing sort of late 70s effect of so many parts of New York City.
Impossible, I think, to avoid in this period of paranoia and foreboding that one sees it as sinister. But I suspect one would have still found it sinister before the pandemic. It's something that this thing is coming in, and that the world underneath it appears to be oblivious. But there was a curious, I was reading something else in the end game, which is where it settled into the park. It settled into the negative space, as if it said, okay, we've toyed with the built form and the people in the subway, but now we will retreat into the safety and comfort of the park, and you can avoid us. But one's putting one's own narrative onto it. It's rather interesting that in so many cases you show the film, and then you don't let the film speak for itself. You explain, and sometimes one gets a completely contradictory narrative, because one, as I suppose, you know, being a sort of picture person, you want to read, as one does when one goes to a place that they're allowed to. One reads into it what one wants to read into it. One takes from urbanism, or one takes from, you know, even the countryside, one takes, after a while, what you wish to take from it. And in the same way that one takes the aesthetic from it, I think there are certain, as in now, certain layered aesthetics, which I find very, very attractive and satisfying. The fact that one uses different intensities of meshing or floating or elements in the sky. And there's certain moments when they rather like a sort of sunset in amongst a complex cloud formation. You get more than the sum of the parts. But then this lady, this rather, the most sinister thing, I think, is that lady's face. It's kind of got that.
If I may just interrupt for a second. It's actually, I have to thank all my studio friends here because I actually scanned all of their faces. So it's all of them there. So that lady you're pointing to is
really unfortunate. But she looks older than somebody in your studio, and it looks as if she's somebody who's been dead and warmed up. I mean, the person's watching. She's very well chosen. She has that kind of oily, kind of, I'll get you there, I'll get you kind of face. I find it really creepy, like some kind of waxwork situation. And the fact that it's in monochrome, so she's in monochrome too, I mean, it makes it work very well. I think it's highly aesthetic, and would have been before the pandemic, would have said a lot of what it says, I think.
Natasha
creeps into safety.
Natasha was thinking it was Bjork, actually. She had a completely different version of your project going. So either way, it's super creepy, I think.
Well, it looks a little bit like the Chris Cunningham Bjork music video.
Yeah.
Kumaran, I'm going to jump in and have a comment just because I've also been texting Kumaran throughout pretty much the whole review because I was watching them on Zoom or on YouTube.
So both of you look so cute together, Brett and Natasha.
And I have some connection to just about all the students from Aditya to Corey to all of 2GAX. So I've really enjoyed seeing all of the work. And I think what's interesting about this project in particular, relative to all the others, it's interesting how the not making architecture turned every project almost into a landscape project. And so it's like a complete avoidance and a return to some kind of digital nature, where here, I think, Kumaran, you take it into the kind of like literal other level where you go into the sort of Northern Lights effect. But I really appreciated how much connection there was with the kind of rendered world or the ethereal and like a real embedding into the city, which I felt was much different to all the other videos that did try and place it in a kind of quite literal context. I thought that attempt was really successful here. I mean, I'm kind of struck by your desire not to ray trace it and place it with light and shadow, because I feel like that would be worth a thing to test. Just to try and deliver that perhaps more sinister quality, but also to think about what it means to intervene in New York today. Because of course, as soon as I saw what image it was, the only thing your mind can go to is that it is a sinister project because of what's happening there today. And so the fact that you turn it into a kind of light, ethereal, beautiful narrative, in some ways a balm. Although now that Peter has said about the face, I can't unsee it. But I do feel like that kind of project of beauty is something that's really worth pursuing right now in particular, and not necessarily feeling beholden to addressing the time and the culture and the kind of terror or apprehension. So I appreciate this kind of take on where we are.
Thank you, Natasha. I have 2 points to that. One, I am working on face filters for my thesis. And I do have the arc as my reference on that one. And 2, to add more sinister to the
Bjork?
Yeah, no, there is a reference in my thesis prep.
Are we saying Bjarke or Bjork? Bjork, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Björk is way more sinister than anything that Björk can ever do.
And then to add more sinister to it, I don't know how many of you noticed, like this clip right now, it's actually the 911
our sound
tower site.
Oh.
The sound cut out for us. I don't know if that was for everybody.
Okay.
Said that to add more sinister to it, it's actually on the 911 Twin Tower site.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you just put it on top of Calatrava.
Yeah,
which is how I refer to that piece of ground now. I think, but also the idea that you would put the project behind you on your Zoom screen.
Yeah.
Totally memorable as a strategy.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes it ethereal or sinister, but the idea that you don't even need to present the project, but just front of it on.
You're living it.
Coming on. The one thing about this project that makes it not sinister to me personally, and which makes it different from the coronavirus, is it always seems geographically localized. It feels like an attraction in New York that I could choose to go see or not see. Whereas it would be sinister to me if it were kind of insidiously smoking through the streets and you couldn't stop it. Why are you localizing it like that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Kumaran, a lot of fun. We had to move on. Final stretch, we only had 2 more projects. Everybody's been a trooper so far, so we're gonna go. We are a little bit behind, and we are not in Dr. Zhivago time, but we are certainly in Gandhi time.
Okay.
Okay,
everyone.
2 more projects. We're gonna go fast.
Hi everyone, I'm Ivo. I will ask Richard to play the video and hope you guys enjoy it. Okay, so the concept of this project is about the decomposition of the muscles. As a project, I located them in the Central Park of New York, and there are several different scale of the objects mixed with different light conditions to create this picturesque artificial infrastructure. And the decomposition doesn't necessarily mean gross and bad. Something nice and beautiful could happen from it.
Okay.
Did you say decomposition of muscles?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the first part of the semester, I keep developing the concept. So actually the first picture of the video, it's the original decomposition of the muscle I come up with, but I find out like the default, of course, the decomposition could be gross, but just like blue cheese, it doesn't necessarily be bad. So I try to make them use a color, use an environment to make them look ideal, more friendly.
I think these kind of qualities are really fascinating where you get, it's like different ways of rendering it. Some are translucent and ethereal, and then the others look like really heavy, waxy, something that's been stitched. It looks like flesh, but then it's coupled with this other stuff. I mean, some of the views go one way or the other. I prefer when you're mixing those two qualities and we can't really extract them. Like there's that one overhead shot where it looks like it's all the ethereal. But I think that admixture of qualities is really something to hold on to. And there are a lot of scenes where you're kind of using that like fog, which creates the desire to get closer to the thing and actually see it. But so I would be a little more strategic with that. Like when you allow us to have visual access, do we ever see it in its entirety?
I think the corollary of that is that sometimes it almost has too much. I think the shot where you see the road with the car and then this very, very artificial sort of almost, hand done collage, it puts one off because it looks so map-like. Whereas some of the more dark based images, the ones where you almost see the thing happening at night and you're not quite sure. I think there needs to be an element of mystery. And then when you see there's that thing and it has an edge and there's a car and there's a road, it's sort of ho-hum. I feel that it could be considerably edited and developed so that one gets the feeling of the strangeness of this thing that suddenly flowers in the park. I think you have a very clear program in your head, and I can, as already been pointed out, I think you're wrestling with the various techniques and various sort of vocabulary of parts. It's not quite gelling, though I don't mean by gelling that it has to all be the same, but I think there's a degree of, it sometimes loses subtlety, but I think it's a great idea and a clear program.
Sorry, I made a mistake. We still have two more projects, so I will invite one or two more comments and we move on to the.
I actually like this notion of this sort of plates moving and changing shape and directions in relation to the possibility of thinking of a sort of architectonic version of a muscle that is actually quite interesting. I mean, you don't have a lot of muscles in architecture. You have columns, you a lot of bones, okay? And balls, but not really muscles. And I don't know, the project suggest a lot of things. Those are beautiful, for instance. The more pictorial and dark and abstract tensionings and opening of these plateaus are much more interesting than the sort of video game of the rest. I mean, I don't want to play the video game, but I will be really interested on seeing all these type of elasticities and articulations. There is a lot on that subject.
Yeah, I like your comment, Fabian, that architecture has a lot of bones. It has a lot of skin and bones. There's been a lot of discussion of that, and I think that this project, yeah, definitely has the potential to sort of say it lives in, just to use another architectural term, like it lives in the poche, right? It's the thing. It's the thing that's sort of in between that can slide from something that's very tectonic and mechanical to something that is more just about matter. And I think that's a really interesting reading. I like that reading that you have of the project very, very much. And I think that maybe to the credit of the student, that it does sort of, it moves back and forth between this kind of machinic quality. And then I think like what Marcelin was saying, something that's a bit more like quilted or tufted. And I think it allows us to move between, again, like the mechanics and something that's more just like a filler, like a pillow filler or some type of matter.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna move, good job. We're gonna move to the last two now. I'm correct. It will be Philippe and Cameron, right, in that order, Rachel?
Yeah. I'm gonna play Philippe.
I promise this time I'm correct too.
Yeah.
Hi guys, I'm Philippe, and thank you, Rachel.
Philippe or Cameron, which of the two of you I forgot? You will...
Thanks, Rachel. Okay, guys, so this video was designed as a teaser describing a video game in which artificial intelligence has attempted to expel all human waste from city centers and mistakenly funneled it into the nearest natural ecosystems. And in this case, that's Primrose Hill, which is a park in Northwest London, where a tree in the center of the park has been ossified due to chemical absorption from that process. And that sort of floral level boss is meant to be released from its chrysalis. It's not meant to be destroyed. And it acts as sort of a natural bastion waiting for the moment when its energy can be released back into the world without fear of misallocation. And all of this came from the idea that, you know, we've integrated countless different types of artificial intelligence into our cities over the last few decades, largely with the goal of streamlining the movement of people and goods. However, the bulk of those, I guess, intellects now function primarily to alleviate the need for us to think about the consequences of our most wasteful actions. So this project is envisioning a future where that pace of technological advance and our desire for an easier life escapes us. And this would sort of be the first level of dealing with that.
Peter, this is not near your house, right?
Yeah, it's within it's less than a mile from here, although it might well be at the end of the moon at the moment. There's a certain irony here because I'm told that the Primrose Hill itself was enlarged. It was a fairly low hill. And then in the early 19th century, you know the story, that
my parents lived right there, yeah.
Made higher by taking either the remnants of diggings, I think to do with the canals, so it's an artificial hill, or with a whole lot of shit inside it. God knows what, you know. And so it's a kind of loop. The story is a kind of loop. I didn't recognize it as Primrose Hill. I mean, the primary characteristic of Primrose Hill on a good day is that it's full of people with dogs. I can't do half when the guy with these animals was very small. We used to drive past regularly and say, "Park dogs." I think there's 11 dogs has been the least number of dogs I've ever seen there, and that's on a sort of wet, cold day. And I can't see Primrose Hill without knowing that you know that it has this hidden, God knows what shit is inside it that made it, and that it's full of dogs. But apart from that, I've lost the plot. I think that's my comment. You realize it's now getting on for it's 20 past 1 in the morning. So my brain is kind of not functioning very imaginatively. It's lovely computery stuff. And yeah, I like the lightning. I like this shot where something's happening across it. Yeah, God help the dogs.
Yeah.
Philip, I don't.
Sorry,
go ahead. No, go ahead, Philip.
No, I was just gonna engage in some banter, but you go first.
Oh, I'll just add to the banter then. I can't recall if I remember the talking of the lines and the articulation of that at midterm and the movement of the material. I don't remember if you had that kind of bubbling red thing that very much, probably more than anything that we've seen today, does look like the visualization of the virus.
Yeah.
And it's maybe, that's what I'm saying, this is maybe just banter or just an observation, but where does that come into play, or was that something that was already brewing and somewhat of a coincidence?
It was a complete coincidence. This was more about the expansion of a synthetic system throughout the city, and this was the idea of little pieces of that growing and taking over other parts of the city, and I wanted to show it at the molecular level as well as sort of the almost like UFO level of the other green version kind of coming over the city. And yeah, sorry.
Wow. Well, you could like sell this to a lot of news outlets right now. It's a pretty good version. It's a pretty good version of it.
I think these scenes are really beautiful, where I feel like I'm in free fall in some kind of forest. And I start to see the particles, and they're really magical. I mean, I wonder if there's a way, when you're talking about this as the trailer, you might need a voiceover or some text or some character who's like moving through it in order to, because I wouldn't have understood when you told us after we watched it what was happening. That's when I could understand. I mean, I can appreciate it's like really quite beautiful and immersive qualities. But I guess the question is, how much do you want the narrative to pull through? And is there a way to kind of embed it in there? Like, how do you get the words in there and the story with the images?
I think that's totally fair. And I think I'm envisioning this more as sort of once you've purchased a game and download it, this is what the player sees as they're dropped into the world and the story is explained to them. But I do agree, it's just more of a movie trailer. This would demand that.
It's got a kind of perfect movie trailer length. At 1 minute 39 seconds, you're sort of within 10 seconds of what that form demands. I think the average trailer is a little under 2 minutes. I watched it and then looked at you and as you were presenting it, background in your apartment of the universe as we know it, and I guess I'm encouraged to hear that it's actually just your parents' house that there's a kind of familiar history, because it was taking a dark turn there for a minute. And
well, we're saving.
I think the thing that keeps it out of this literal, I don't know if mom and dad are on the presentation, by the way, but I'm hoping they're getting a chance to watch this also, because it's probably a version of the Heath they're not familiar with.
Yeah.
Although it's true, just as an anecdote, that the train line at the bottom of Parliament, at the bottom of the park here, also the train that moves radioactive material in the UK between power plants. And one of the astonishing things is they do that all night while London sleeps. Radioactive material are being moved along. Yeah. So there's probably a degree of believability that should concern us all regarding.
Those behind, 2 blocks behind here.
Exactly.
I always use this phrase that we used to have beauty, then Kant introduced us to the sublime, and now we have eeriness. And this is like a perfect picture of eeriness, and it's so familiar into the video game psychology in a way. But in architectural context, I think that big skyscraper in the end with the fire, that's actually quite creepy. I mean, creepy,
yeah.
Creepy, real creepy, more than weird or eerie. But I think that actually one of the things that the sublime opened us was to this sort of existential sense, to emptiness and to gigantism, and I think that the eerie, we try to reject it, let's say, all the time. And I think that more and more through videos or through entering hospitals, through seeing constant convalescence or altered life, we are getting more used to eeriness. And I think it's not that bad, actually, because, I mean, it is something that is there. I mean, we have to deal with so many parts of the eerie. And of course, actually, horror movies exploit that all the time. But my feeling is that if we will actually integrate the eerie in our normal lives all the time, we could actually see new creativities coming.
I think that's fair. I think subtle discomfort with what we already understand is an important driver in a project like this.
Exactly. Like almost if it's not a dream or a nightmare, but you have to decide.
Like something's wrong, like, why can't I fix this? What do I need to do? And that's the idea behind the game that would come from this, is you don't really know why you're so motivated to drive and fix this park, but it's very important that you do. You just understand that.
Philip, thank you. Good job. You brought it into it. Now Cameron is gonna bring us home. This is the last one for real. I hope. Yes, right, Jalu? This is the last one for real. It's 4 days of I don't know how many Zoom. I don't know. I'm zooming in and out of life.
We have 2 more.
No, this is one. Cameron, it's in your hands, man. Bring us home.
I meant we have 2 more days, Hernan. Not 2 more. I meant we have 2 more days after that.
Oh my God! Yeah, don't tell me about it. I mean, after this, I had to talk to 200 international students that are going to come in the fall. So my day is only halfway.
Yeah.
Thank you. How are they going to come?
Well,
magic. So I'll talk a little bit after this plays.
Though we are used to seeing them practically everywhere these days, from every souvenir shop in the world to card stores to museum gift shops, and even at the grocery store, postcards are a relatively recent invention.
Los Angeles is situated in Southern California on the west coast of the USA.
The paradigm has shifted. The world is accelerating. The science fiction of yesterday is rapidly becoming the science fiction of right now.
This is the sound of a garbage truck in Taipei, a subway in Seoul, 3:30 in Santiago, Auckland, Singapore, Copenhagen, Los Angeles, Sydney, London, Nairobi, Venice, Shenzhen, Kuwait City, Mumbai, and Songdo. That's in South Korea.
Are places where humans and nature coexist in perfect harmony. The island of Nararu.
I love collecting postcards as a way to inspire my own adventures and to share.
So this project has sort of become an examination of the postcard as a piece of physical infrastructure, and sort of finds itself at the intersection of infrastructure, advertising, and placemaking. And like most projects this semester, it's become difficult to discuss outside of the context of our current circumstance. So at the moment, it might be a little bit tongue-in-cheek to advertise travel, but advertisements are essentially what these have become, just like a paper postcard. So a sort of nostalgia-inducing, idyllic and strange take on somewhere that you've never been before, that are free to roam about the city.
Well, to me, it seems almost like you're not advertising travel, but you're actually enabling travel for those who can't. So it seems completely appropriate to the current situation. Like that I could step out into the street and like pull down this balloon and have, you know, the Taipei balloon here in Los Angeles, or Peter could step out in London and pull. I mean, so to me, that seems like totally feasible in a way. And I guess the quality of the, I mean, I wonder too, if somehow the text itself might have been integrated into the formal qualities of the thing. I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity there for how those formal qualities also sample. I didn't really make the Pig LA connection exactly. What was that one about? Because it seems like there's a matching of qualities with places.
I don't have like a really great answer for the pig. At the beginning, it was really just a scale figure that kind of stuck around and has kind of become the format for these postcards.
And I love it, and I ask you to keep it. Because why not? I mean, who doesn't like a nice pig?
I mean, who doesn't like a pig that has a hula hoop on it?
Exactly.
I think in the lockdown situation, you know, we're in a situation now where actually almost anything goes. If you say you're showing me Seoul, or you're showing me LA, or you're showing me a beastie, why not? I think you know, the positive side of this lockdown is one gets into a weird psychological mood of sort of why not? If they tell us we're gonna, you know, be cured by something that drops on your head, why not? Or if you tell me that actually Primrose Hill is not a mile away, it's actually next door, I say why not? So there's a wonderful word that the Scots have, which is the word beastie. The word beast and IE on the end. It's a wee beastie. And I think you've hit upon the beastie. It's exactly describes what you have. And then you put a label on the beastie. And if the beastie has a pig on the beastie, why not? I think maybe it's the end of the night now, but it's legit. How you see this as a poster, the trouble is for me, postcard has that. I mean, I think I last sent a postcard 20 years ago, even me, you know, they're kind of things that grandfathers keep and that used to be colored with artificial pigments, you know, they're kind of completely lost the last postcard I have, advertises a building that I did, but I use it as jotting paper. They don't, so that but then for people of my generation, postcard meant dirty postcard, seaside postcard, postcards with obscene jokes on. But now in the present mood, why not? If you have a floating beastie with a label of a town on it, could even be that it's saying so, but it's actually over Copenhagen. Why not? So that one's pushing. You've got what I keep calling a version of what I call the SCI-Arc hedgehog, which seems to be a preferred generic type. I don't mind the SCI-Arc hedgehog. He's fallen apart a bit here, but he's doing a grand job. And the pig can eat the hedge of the hedgehog. I think, why not? And then it's juxtaposed over some unsuspecting European city, and why not again? I think it's a good one to end up on, because it's kind of, it's a bit funny. We've had a lot of sinister, and we're thinking sinisterly. It's quite nice to end up on something with a stupid bloody pig on the top. Why not? I know it's a rather low-level comment, but it's a positive. Actually, I think you are a creative escapist and nostalgic.
Great title for a really serious architectural show. Why not?
Right. It also has, Cameron, it also has some association with like blimps. And, when you're in a city, a lot of times, especially in a place like Los Angeles, it's pretty dense and it's very, at the same time, sprawling. Like you see a blimp and it indicates to you that there's something going on. There's an activity that you're not a part of. And I think that's an interesting association too, that you may not be celebrating something, but somewhere else in the city, people are. And I think that's kind of a wonderful thing to think about right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great point, Christy, because I always saw the blimps on this only good year. Like, why not? Like, there are like all these different brands, it's always, do they own the blimp? Are they only one that get a license? So I wonder with these postcards, is this the one, it's like Goodyear, like you only have one brand, one city. I think that here, it would be, I love that comment, Christy, because I imagine here you can see how people is getting messages from different cities. So far away, I'm going to get one from, I don't know, another one from South America, another one, from, like you start to see this connection that you get, through these blimps. But my question, Cameron, that's just taking on Christy's comment, but my question, Cameron, had to do with why they're so similar. I mean, is there a subtlety of the type of grass that is there that is different in each city? So it's very subtle, the differences, but actually the primitive is the same. It's like a blimp. You just change the image on the top, because I think they all seem quite similar with the earth change. They're different colors, but that's a render quality, but not a quality that they've changed. Like would they have? They're all about different natures that they have. I always find interesting how we have sold water as a commodity. So we sell water as a commodity, but today you cannot drink, if you like Fiji, it's really different from Evian. They're really subtle differences, but they all look the same. It's a little bit like different wines. So I wonder if like these blimps or these, postcards are about the subtleties of seasons, so when you're in winter, you get the season of the spring because it's a different country, or you get snow if it's, something that has a narrative that is more tailored. I think this is a big idea. The renders are amazing and really high resolution. But I think that I would have liked to see, a few more, the subtleties to be more evident. Like here, it's similar, but it's the same render with different color, maybe different flower. But it seems quite, Seattle and LA, and maybe they're not so different, but Seoul one,
I mean, that was what
I think that they're hairs.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Brett.
No, I was just going to say, I think one of the surprising qualities, Cameron, I thought at first you must be from Seattle to put it in the big leagues and advertise it so relentlessly as the first hotspot in America that we all wanted to make sure we would never go back to ever again. It was like a hometown project to make it matter again. But I think one of the effects of the project, intended or not, is to kind of make the differences between cities, particularly global cities like Seattle or well, okay, Phoenix maybe not, but that they're interchangeable. And I think in a particularly late 20th century model of international travel, which became the dominant sector of advanced economies for 20 or 30 years, right? In which cities like London are inhabited by tens of millions more people as tourists than they are by those people that live there, that you were sort of flattening the differences. And I thought the only way to maybe bring the project up to date would be to simply advertise the idea of being outside, the impossible thing for us all to do today. And it wouldn't be much of a leap that we're all going to be, in effect, we're first going to be offered the opportunity to go outside, and many people won't take it up, but there will be a project that's not unlike 20th century tourism to get us all to leave our apartments and flats and buildings and go outside. And I think that's a really interesting discovery in the project, that the cities, it's either a huge category mistake by you as a late modern architect to want to make cities matter more than the rest of the planet, or it's the beginning of a project that sort of sees a next way in which advertising and branding is really going to play a crucial role for what right now is just being talked about as policy decisions or planning strategies for us to reopen the world that we know.
Yeah.
Well, I think, Brett, that goes into the city state, an idea that the power, like, for example, happening in California, the city has more, or wants to have more power and override the central power in Washington due to obvious reasons right now. And so, you give the power to that city. So imagine maybe, Cameron, your fiction could have that future of, almost like city states. So the boundaries are like, much smaller.
I'm picturing you've got a version that Hernan's going to use at his next meeting, which has just got SCI-Arc above the furry thing to help convince people to come here. It's not much of a leap. And, we're having to work it through at UCLA because we're a separate legal entity. The city and county policies don't apply at all, in fact, in terms of how we use outside space. And it's a genuine issue. And the history of cities like London is the history of autonomy operating at an incredibly local level. And that sort of medieval structure is what the modern world we think of grew out of. And part of what we're working through right now is the extent to which those sort of models have the potential to now return in unbelievable and almost scary ways for all of our lives.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're gonna leave it here. If we can stop sharing, there you go. So we have the grade. Well, first, thank to all our critics. You guys have been awesome. Peter Cook, I don't know where are you, but oh, man, almost 2 a.m. in London.
That's amazing.
You are amazing and hanging in there all the way. So thank you so much for all of you. I have to say, thank you to Rachel, who does a remarkable job teaching together for a long time by now. Thank you to the students. I have to say, probably out of all the students in SCI, we were one of the best equipped to transition to the platform. That's being said, on the human side, we are fully aware of how tough it is these days for everybody. So for everybody to keep the energy and the optimism and soldier through and push forward. But at the same time, I want to say this to everybody who's listening here, and I think it's important, and we will talk more about this. I think these are tough times, but we are lucky in the sense that we are healthy and at home and doing what we want. And in a way, I like to remind us that we find a way to keep doing our job, and you guys keep doing your job, which is to produce remarkable imagination work for all of us to spend 3 or 4 hours talking and get excited. And if for anything else, I think it takes us away of the other things that we're doing. And I think that what good architecture should do and good design should do. And I'm super proud of what you guys work did. On a personal note, this studio and this situation brought me back to love teaching after I was very tired of it. So I find new energy in these circumstances. So I thank you guys for that. And it has been incredibly stimulating and exciting. So to my students, we'll meet on Monday, so we'll get the chance to talk in a private meeting, since we have a lot of other people listening here. So we will talk Monday, and Rachel will let you know what time. Florencia, Marcel, and Christy, Brett, Fabian, Peter, Graham, Peter Frankfurt, and John Hawk. That was there only for 5 minutes before the power went out in Oakland. Thank you so much, you guys. I think it was a lot of fun, and I thought it was truly enjoyable. Peter, go to bed, my friend.
In a few hours' time, I'm ironically about to give a lecture for the Bartlett called Wars and Spooks. How did I know that spooks were going to come up in such proliferation?
Thank you so much for all of you.
Yeah.
I send you my love. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. It was a highlight.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.